Board of Administration meeting to order. The first order of business is roll call. Mrs. Hopper, please.
Henry Jones,
Here.
Margaret Brown,
Happy St. Patrick's.
Rob Fechner,
Good morning.
Frank Ruffino for Fiona Ma,
Good morning.
Lisa Middleton,
Present.
David Miller,
Here.
Stacy Oliveris,
Here.
Irena Ortega,
Here.
Jason Perez,
Here.
Ramon Rubacava,
Here.
Teresa Taylor,
Here.
Shonda Wesley,
Here.
Lynn Paquin for Betty Yee.
Here.
Mr. President, all is in attendance.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Hopper. The next item on the agenda is the approval of the March 17 Board of Administration time agenda. Do I have a motion?
Move approval.
Moved by Ms. Brown, second by Mr. Miller. Mrs. Hopper, please.
Margaret Brown,
Aye.
Rob Fechner,
Aye.
Frank Ruffino for Fiona Ma,
Aye.
Lisa Middleton,
Aye.
David Miller,
Aye.
Stacy Oliveris,
Aye.
Irena Ortega,
Aye.
Jason Perez,
Aye.
Ramon Rubacava,
Aye.
Teresa Taylor,
Aye.
Shonda Wesley,
Aye.
Lynn Paquin for Betty Yee.
Aye.
Mr. President, I have Margaret Brown making the motion, David Miller seconding it for agenda item 2.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Hopper. The next item on the agenda is Pledge of Allegiance, and I've asked Ms. Ortega to lead us in the pledge. Ms. Ortega, please.
Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Get my screen back here, just a second. Got some stuff on my screen here. Okay, now I think I'm back. Okay, well, good morning again, board members. And I, first of all, I'd just like to start off by congratulating Rob Fechner and Ramon Rubacava to being elected to the chair and vice chair of the Pension and Health Benefits Committee. And also congratulate Lisa Middleton being elected to the vice chair of the Board Governance Committee. And as you know, I was re-elected to be chair of that committee. So we all look forward to working with you throughout the year. I want to take a moment of personal privilege to honor the life and contributions of a Calpers team member and a key stakeholder of our organization. Kevin, during the investment committee on Monday, we took time to remember Kevin Winter. Kevin was a lifelong team member who recently passed away. He was a managing investment director on our investment team and served the organization for 31 years. Kevin was one of the very first student interns in our investment office before officially joining Calpers in 1990. He worked in our fixed income team for most of his career before being appointed to a managing investment director of our newly formed opportunistic credit strategy asset class in 2017. 2 years later, he was named the head of our investment research and strategy group. Our investment team spoke of Kevin as a kind, caring man who was deeply committed to Calpers and our mission. Our thoughts and prayers go out to his family. We We also, to his family. And we also recently lost an important stakeholder, Harvey Robinson, passed away in early February from COVID-19. Harvey was the former president of Retired Public Employees Association. He was a dedicated healthcare director for RPEA, actively involved with Calpers healthcare issues, and often spoke about our board during public comment, advocating on behalf of Calpers retirees. During his working career, he was a Calpers team member for 29 years. So on behalf of the board, we offer our deepest condolences to his family and the RPEA family. Harvey, we will miss you at these meetings, but not forgotten. As many of you know, March is a Women's History Month. I'm always proud to say the majority of the board is women, and this organization is led by a CEO, Marcy Frost. So I would just like to also acknowledge all the women that are team members of Calpers and recognize this month for all of the contributions that all of you have made to help Calpers be successful as we provide our fiduciary responsibility to our members abroad. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Frost for her comments. Ms. Frost, please.
Great. Thank you, President Jones, and good morning, everyone. Today does mark the 1-year anniversary of the COVID-19 pandemic and the way that we really changed the way that Calpers functions and provides services to both its members as well as our employer community. We are starting to see infection rates go down, which is great news, and the vaccines being more widely and strategically distributed throughout the state. In reflecting on some of the experiences of last year, I am proud of the resiliency of our team and really appreciative of everyone's willingness to adapt to this virtual environment and really to stay productive and engaged and continue to serve our members, which is our primary goal and our primary mission. So beyond just meeting online and operating remotely, this pandemic has required us to look at other creative ways to connect with our members and deliver the services that they really rely on the team to provide. So for example, and I've got a few examples here, we did create just prior to COVID-19 hitting a new electronic gateway for our members to pay for health benefit premiums, service credit purchases, and other benefit services online. And by the end of last month, we had just over 11,000 members who made $11 million in payments. So I'd like to thank the financial office and our IT organization for putting that new service in place for our members to have more of the ability to do this in a self-serve kind of manner. And while we're not open yet for in-person appointments, we now provide members with virtual counseling appointments. As Mr. Sweeney reported during the Pension and Health Benefits Committee, last year was the first year that we offered this service. It really was a quick pivot over from the one-on-one in-person meetings to these virtual offerings. And we completed 45,000 virtual counseling appointments. And we have continued to receive high satisfaction ratings from the members who are using that service. Also, COVID-19 forced us to stop printing our Perspective newsletter. We turned to a monthly member email to communicate information and to provide really important updates about either the work or about program developments. We've now sent out nearly 15 million emails, and those emails have driven a record number of visits to our website. So that is very good traffic coming through a very high open rate from those emails. As for returning to the office, I know I get a lot of questions about this. We continue to base our decisions on the guidance coming from state and federal officials and public health experts. That's really been the guidance. We also have Dr. Logan here on our team and Don Molds on our team who contribute and provide information every day in our huddles. Again, so fortunately, we are seeing a positive direction as we approach the summer, and our current planning is to assess the full timing of our return and when our return to work plan would be initiated in July. And if the vaccine continues to roll out in the way that it has, and health officials, continue to lighten restrictions, we could start transitioning back to the office in September, and that would be done first on a voluntary basis, which again is a part of our return to work plan. Later this morning, you will also be hearing about our diversity, equity, and inclusion framework, or DEI, that is being led by Marlene Timberlake-Diadamo, with several contributors from around Calpers, including our health teams, our investment teams, our procurement teams, just as some examples. This would be an important set of strategies that are aimed at strengthening our existing commitment to DEI in our culture, in our business lines, and our operations. The framework focuses on culture, talent management, health equity, vendor relationships, and investments. So we're very happy to share our work to date and look forward to hearing your feedback later this morning. Taking a look now at some of our upcoming events. Next week, we will host another Calpers Benefit Education event. This will be our first one for 2021, and that event will be offered on March 24th and March 25th. We are looking forward to the new season of the virtual CBs, knowing that they were very well attended in 2020 when we saw over 15,000 class attendees at the two events that we had held virtually. And again, these events return very high satisfaction ratings from the participants, very good feedback coming in that we have used to adapt this year's offerings. A newly added feature for this year, which really did come from some of the feedback from the participants, would be to offer the virtual exhibits so members can speak directly with representatives either from our customer service teams, from the health program, or from representatives of the Social Security Office. Another upcoming virtual event is the Calpers and CalSTRS Investment Diversity Forum. That will be held on June 22nd of this year. This will be the fourth event we've co-hosted with CalSTRS to help advance diversity and inclusion in the investment industry. It will be a free one-day event this year. And sessions will address a number of timely matters, including the impact of COVID-19 on human capital management and how bias can potentially impact business and the financial markets. We'll post the details on our website as we continue program development for the event. And then finally, I want to mention that we started a new virtual version of our employer leadership dialogues, or ELDs, as they are fondly known within the organization. These really are peer-to-peer meetings with senior leaders from our contracting cities and counties, special districts, and schools. Our actuarial office, our health program, our customer service area, legislative affairs, and stakeholder relations all participate in these events. It's an opportunity for us to share new information or changing information coming from policies or legislative items, or just simply how to administer a current benefit, such as reportable earnings. But it's also an opportunity for us to listen and hear directly from our employers about what they're struggling with or what their challenges are. And so we're very happy that we have scheduled 6 of those ELDs throughout the year. Now looking ahead to next month's board meeting, we'll be planning for the next fiscal year by reviewing the proposed operating budget and reviewing both the enterprise and enterprise compliance and risk plans. And we'll also be sharing the results of our annual employee engagement survey, which I'm very happy to share with you. Moving on now to some outreach, the NASRA event, which is something we attend here at Calpers. We believe that peer networking with the other U.S. public pension plans is extremely important. We can get updates on legislative items or policy items or governance items that other systems throughout the United States are facing. And it's just an opportunity to network with people who do the same business that we do. So I was very happy to be able to attend that along with Danny Brown. That was followed by the series annual conference last week. I was on a panel to discuss our investment strategies aligned with the Paris Agreement. And really, this was just a continuation of the discussions we've been having about the impacts of climate change on the global economy and our three-pronged really investment approach to mitigate risk, but also to identify opportunities in this transition. I also had the opportunity to participate on a panel regarding investments in the private markets and private equity specifically. on a virtual event that was organized by the Boston Consulting Group. That group just provides guidance for business leaders in several sectors of the economy. And this particular panel I was on with Mark Wiseman was focused on private equity and ESG in the private markets.
Let's call
President
the
Jones
meeting
mentioned
to
Women's History Month, and there's another very important observance this month, which is Cesar Chavez Day on March 31st. He was a tireless advocate for the rights of farm workers and an ardent believer in nonviolent demonstrations to help drive change. As a part of our diversity inclusion efforts within the organization, we'll have a number of articles highlighting his work throughout the month on our intranet. And then I'll close with the announcement that this year's class of APEX nominees was recently announced. APEX stands for Achieving Performance Excellence. It really, for me, it's the highest form of recognition because it is peer nominated and peer reviewed. We have 22 team members who have been nominated this year by their peers, and a committee of peer reviewers are going through the detailed award nomination packets this week, and we'll be able to announce those recipients soon. So I'd like to congratulate all the nominees and really thank those who nominated their peers, as well as thanking the peer review team for putting in the work to really support an important program here. And then the last note, really the last note, is that I did mention that Leanna Bailey Kremens has been appointed by Governor Newsom to become California's Chief Technology Officer at the California Department of Technology. Leanna has worked with Calpers since 2013, and she served in a number of roles here. She served first as our Chief Information Officer, then as our Chief Health Director, and then most recently as our Chief Information Security Officer. In each position, I think what we all valued about Leanna, and you certainly saw this at the board meetings, is her commitment to excellence and to all of the CalPERS members in which she felt that she served directly, even in some of these indirect roles. We wish Leanna the very best in her new role, serving the people of California. So that does complete my report, President Jones, but I am happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Frost. And we do have a question, Mr. Perez.
Thank you, Marcy. Not so much directed towards your report, but since we're not revisiting the investment stuff anymore, yeah. Do we have some kind of a document, a controlling document that the investment office needs to abide by for what they may and may not invest in, other than like our restrictions, like an investment resolution or an SOP or something like that?
We have, we've worked the board through our investment beliefs, as well as the board has set certain policies around how the assets can be invested or divested, as you all went through on Monday. But other than that, within the delegated authority that's been provided to me and through the CIO, they do have the flexibility to invest to their expertise. But the guiding documents would be your policies, delegations, and investment beliefs.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so that, I think that was the only question for you, Ms. Frost, at this time. So now we will move to the action consent item approval of the February 18, 2021 Board Administration meeting minutes. Do I have a motion?
Move approval.
Moved by Mr. Miller. Second by Ms. Oliveris. Okay, so Mrs. Hopper, please.
Margaret Brown,
Aye.
Rob Fechner,
Aye.
Frank Ruffino for Fiona Ma,
Aye.
Lisa Middleton,
Aye.
David Miller,
Aye.
Stacy Oliveris,
Aye.
Irena Ortega,
Aye.
Jason Perez,
Aye.
Ramon Rubacava,
I will abstain. I wasn't present at the February 18th meeting. Thank you.
Teresa Taylor,
Aye.
Shonda Wesley,
I'll need to abstain for the same reason. It wasn't there in February.
Lynn Paquin for Betty Yee.
Aye.
Mr. President, I have a motion being made by David Miller, seconded by Stacy Oliveris for agenda item 6A. We have 10 ayes and 2 abstentions from Ramon Rubacava, and one from Shonda Wesley.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Hopper. The item passes. The next item is information consent items, and I have no requests to move anything from the consent agenda item. So I will now move on to agenda item 8, committee reports and actions. And the first one is the investment committee. And for that, I call on the chair, Mrs. Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. President. The investment committee met via video conference on March 15th, 2021. The committee approved the following agenda items: 7A, the recommendation to select candidate portfolio 1 for the long-term care strategic asset allocation. Agenda item 9A, to affirm and maintain Calpers' current divestments from tobacco companies which sell firearms illegal for private ownership in California, companies with specified business operations in Iran and Sudan, and companies that generate 50% or more of their income from the mining of thermal coal. The committee received reports on the following topics: an overview of key risk concepts as part of the asset liability management process, semi-annual trust level review from the board's investment consultants and staff, a report on the corporate governance program's proxy voting and corporate engagement work streams, and the chair directed staff to provide an article to the board related to the pension obligation bonds as discussed during the meeting. Consider having additional education and analysis on the impact of special purpose acquisition companies. Develop a list of divestment requests, which Calpers has opted to choose engagement as opposed to divestment. Conclude analysis and develop a plan by the end of 2021, resulting from the engagement of 3 companies identified that mine thermal coal. The committee heard public comment on the following topics: Calpers investment risks, board policy, and labor dispute. At this time, I'd like to share some highlights of what to expect at the June 2021 Investment Committee meeting. A first reading of the proposed updates to the total fund investment policy, an update on the Sustainable Investment Strategic Plan, and more information on the asset liability management process. The next meeting for the investment committee is scheduled for June 14th, 2021 via video. That's my report.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Taylor. And for the next item on the agenda is 8B, Pension and Health Benefits Committee. For that report, I call on the chair, Mr. Fechner.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Pension Health Benefits Committee, PHBC, met on March 16, 2021. The committee re-elected Rob Fechner as chair and Ramon Rubacava as vice chair of the PHBC. The committee recommends and I move the board approve the following. Agenda item 5C, approve staff's recommendation to submit the final rulemaking file to the Office of Administrative Law that will amend existing regulations regarding the minimum standards for California Public Employees Retirement System health benefit plans.
On the motion of the committee, Mrs. Hopper, please.
Margaret Brown,
No.
Rob Fechner,
Aye.
Frank Ruffino for Fiona Ma,
Aye.
Lisa Middleton,
Aye.
David Miller,
Aye.
Stacy Oliveris,
Aye.
Elena Ortega,
Aye.
Jason Perez,
Aye.
Ramon Rubacava,
Aye.
Teresa Taylor,
Aye.
Shonda Wesley,
Aye.
Lynn Paquin for Betty Yee.
Aye.
Mr. President, I have a motion being made by Rob Fechner on agenda item 5C. I have 11 aye votes, 1 no vote made by Margaret Brown.
Thank you, Ms. Hopper. Mr. Fechner.
Thank you. Agenda item 7A, approve staff's recommendation to expand the Western Health Advantage into Humboldt County. This item also provided a presentation of the Calpers insurer competition model. The model confirmed a 3-plan extension proposal. Blue Shield Access Plus into 8 Bay Area counties, Blue Shield Trio into the counties of Monterey, Santa Cruz, Stanislaus, and Orange counties, and the United Healthcare Signature Value Harmony Basic into 5 Southern California counties approved by the board in November 2020.
On the motion of the committee, Mrs. Hopper, please.
Margaret Brown,
Aye.
Rob Fechner,
Aye.
Frank Ruffino for Fiona Ma,
Aye.
Lisa Middleton,
Aye.
David Miller,
Aye.
Stacy Oliveris,
Aye.
Irene Ortega,
Aye.
Jason Perez,
Aye.
Ramon Rubacava,
Aye.
Teresa Taylor,
Aye.
Shonda Wesley,
Aye.
Lynn Paquin for Betty Yee.
Aye.
Mr. President, I have a motion being made by Rob Fechner, 12 aye votes for agenda item 7A.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Hopper. Mr. Fechner.
Thank you. The committee received reports on the following topics. The committee reviewed the PHBC delegation and has no recommended changes. The delegation will be presented for board approval along with the other committee delegations at a subsequent meeting. The committee received information regarding health open enrollment results and retiree cost of living adjustment. The chair directed staff to present a behavioral health briefing at a future PHBC meeting. Keep the committee informed of any changes seen in future liabilities in the long-term care program. At this time, I would like to share some highlights of what to expect at the May PHBC meeting. The committee will meet in closed session to discuss an update on health plan rate renewal negotiation strategy. The next meeting of the PHBC is scheduled for May 2021 in Sacramento, California. That concludes my report, Mr. President.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Fechner. There was some feedback. Can you hear me? Okay. There was no meeting of the Finance and Administration Committee, no meeting of the Performance Compensation and Talent Management Committee, and no meeting of the Risk Audit Committee. So the next item on the agenda is the Board Governance Committee. And for that, I call on the Vice Chair, Ms. Middleton. And also, before we take any action on this, I do have a request from Ms. Brown to speak on this item. So Ms. Middleton, please.
Okay, thank you, Mr. President. The Board Governance Committee met on March 16, 2021. The committee held an election for Governance Committee Chair and Vice Chair. Henry Jones was reelected as Chair. Liz Middleton was reelected as Vice Chair. Mr. President, I would like to make a substitute motion. The committee's motion yesterday approved the language prepared by management and further directed that management bring back language clarifying that board members have an obligation to protect confidentiality and to not interfere in investigations. After the committee met yesterday, management did prepare some language for that purpose, and I think we should approve it today as it captures what I had in mind and the sentiments I thought I heard from many of my fellow board members. The new language reads as follows. Board members shall maintain inviolate the confidentiality of all information pertaining to allegations or investigations and shall not interfere with the conduct of investigations. The revised language would then read as followed. Through the board president, monitor investigations into allegations of misconduct by the chief executive officer, chief actuary, chief compliance officer, chief financial officer, chief health director, chief investment officer, chief operating officer, or general counsel. Upon receipt of a plausible, non-frivolous allegation of misconduct by any of the aforementioned personnel, any preliminary determination that the allegation, if substantiated, would constitute misconduct, management, the CEO, unless the allegation concerns the CEO, will notify the board president and the chair of the Risk and Audit Committee. management will inform the full board upon the commencement of a formal investigation into the alleged misconduct. Board members shall maintain inviolate the confidentiality of all information pertaining to allegations or investigations and shall not interfere with the conduct of investigations. On behalf of the committee, I move approval.
Okay, it's moved by Ms. Milton. Do we have a second?
Second.
Need a second?
Rob did.
Mr. Fechner. Okay, so it's moved by Ms. Milton, second by Mr. Fechner. Ms. Brown.
Thank you, President Jones. Yeah, I raised these issues yesterday at board governance, but I want to raise them again with this change to the board governance policy. I think we've missed the mark here. I think it's critical for us in our oversight role to be made aware and be told of serious allegations, not against who, like only the top people, but we should know about what. So basically, it could be somebody in the business office, it could be somebody in health benefits or in pension benefits. It needs, this policy should talk about what and when we're told, not who, because we've eliminated, 99% of staff misconduct in this policy, potentially, because we've limited it to positions and not to what misconduct was done. And I think this is a really bad error in terms of oversight. And I, for one, will be voting no on this policy change.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. Ms. Taylor.
Yes, thank you. I like the change. I will say I for the change. I think my only concern is as we go forward with this, that we're it's kind of like my conversation yesterday where it's hard to determine where you're at when you're saying, okay, we're going to let the board president and the risk and audit committee chair know that we might look at this. And then if in a full investigation, then we'll inform the whole board. It seems to me that sort of crosses over. By the time that gets notified I would think there would have to be some sort of confirmation before you'd let the board president. That's my only concern. I just think maybe we end up letting the whole board know rather than just these two folks, because you're getting some sort of confirmation that we're looking at this and it's substantiated. So then, anyway, that's my only concern. I'm wondering if maybe we should change the language to the full board.
Okay, I see no request to follow up on that. We have Mr. Miller. And by the way, we are referring to item 7A from the governance committee, just to clarify what we're discussing. Okay, Mr. Miller.
Yeah, on the item, I'm comfortable with the idea of basically when something is afoot, the president and the chair of RAC are notified, and that we only bring it to the full board when an actual investigation becomes underway. But to Ms. Brown's point, the way I look at this is the focus on the C-suite folks for any misconduct really reflects how critical those positions are in terms of visibility, potential consequence, reputational issues, and frankly, just how much it can impact the whole organization, and how it's any misconduct, whether it's serious, whether it's criminal, whether it's civil, whether it's policy, whatever, needs to be brought to our attention for those positions critically. It doesn't mean that some serious misconduct by anyone within the organization wouldn't be brought to us at the discretion and the responsibility of management to bring us those things at some point. But to cast our net that widely that for, and to try to pick out exactly what kinds of things at every level of the organization, regardless of, it just seems like that would be a whole separate policy, and it would be very complicated and challenging to administer. And I'm comfortable with leaving that to management's discretion. They've never really failed to bring anything to our attention when it was a serious misconduct that wasn't by C-suite folks. Really, I think this is the focus on our senior leadership, which is where the biggest potential for harm to the organization and our members' interests, and certainly our reputational risks lies. So if for that purpose, I support this item.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Mr. Perez.
I didn't give it much thought until Margaret brought it up, but we have seen throughout different organizations that low-ranking or low-positioned people have destroyed organizations. Not to say that's happened here, but I think more work needs to be done around this. I think voting on it today without completely vetting it is kind of a poor idea.
Okay.
Plus, I would have liked to have seen Lisa's proposal with the new language that staff provided her. I tried to look it up in the board books, but I didn't see it. I would have liked to have seen that ahead of time before we have to vote on that. I'm more of a reader than a listener.
Okay, Ms. Milton. I think that the information that was sent to the board regarding a summary of the committee meetings, I think there is a line that actually that Ms. Milton referred to is in there. What she is doing is recommending that we go ahead and approve it as opposed to bringing it back in at the next.
Where's that at, Henry?
The reports that in your board book, we received the summary of the meetings.
It's grayed out and there's no attachments.
It's what?
It is grayed out and there are no attachments.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, well that's
yeah,
where.
Lisa, that was not an indictment on you by any means.
I'm referring to the original report that came out.
Right, I think Ms. Middleton's motion was to go with some different changes that were on the document originally.
Ms. Middleton?
Let me reread the new sentence. It is one new sentence. Board members shall maintain inviolate the confidentiality of all information pertaining to allegations or investigations, and shall not interfere with the conduct of investigations. It's intended as a straightforward, plain statement that as members of the board, we have a responsibility to keep confidential any information we receive regarding an allegation or an investigation, and that as board members, we are not to interfere with the conduct of the investigation.
Thank you, Ms. Milton.
Whatsoever our responsibility to monitor the work of all people who work for Calpers.
Thank you, Ms. Milton. Ms. Ortega?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to comment that I view this provision as additive to what is already expected and required of the executive staff. It is additive to all of the procedures that are in place for employees to raise concerns, to go to whistleblower hotlines, all of the avenues that exist for expressing concerns about misbehavior. It is on top of all of that that this paragraph is added. So, I want to make clear that's the way I see it. That's why I don't feel like we are giving up any of our oversight authority. And I think it's important that that be very clear that that's the board's view of these provisions so that everyone amongst staff understands that's our intention. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Harte. Ms. Taylor, are you asking to speak again? Or
No. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we do have a motion on the floor by Ms. Middleton and second by Mr. Fechner. Ms. Hopper, please.
Margaret Brown,
No.
Rob Fechner,
Aye.
Frank Ruffino for Fiona Ma,
Aye.
Lisa Middleton,
Aye.
David Miller,
Aye.
Stacy Oliveris,
Aye.
Irena Ortega,
Aye.
Jason Perez,
No.
Ramon Rubacava,
Aye.
Teresa Taylor,
Aye.
Shonda Wesley,
Aye.
Lynn Paquin for Betty Yee,
Aye.
Mr. President, I have the motion being made by Lisa Middleton, seconded by Rob Fechner. I have 10 ayes, 2 noes, one made by Margaret Brown, the other made by Jason Perez on agenda item 7A of the Board Governance Committee.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hopper. Okay, thank you. The item passes. We'll now move to the next item, item 9, which is proposed decisions of administrative law judges. And we do have Mr. Sherrod. Oh, Ms. Middleton, you asked.
Yes, I need to complete my committee report.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. The committee reviewed the Board Governance Committee delegation and has no recommended changes. The delegation will be presented for board approval along with other committee delegations at a subsequent meeting. The committee discussed how the board's shared responsibility for CIO personnel decisions should be implemented and determined that this will be resolved at the full board meeting in April. The committee also solicited new board member views on future committee agenda items. 2 suggestions were made: to add an item for discussion regarding the positions of board chair, chair of the Board Governance Committee, and chair of the Risk and Audit Committee being occupied by the same person, and an item to discuss if there should be rotation guidelines for the roles of president, vice president, committee chairs, and vice chairs. The team will work with the chair and vice chair to agendize these 2 items for upcoming meetings. The next meeting of the Board Governance Committee is tentatively scheduled for June 16, 2021 in Sacramento, California. That concludes the committee report. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Ms. Middleton. Okay, so now we will move to item 9, propose the decision of administrative law judge. And we do have in the queue, I think, Mr. Sherrod Shaw, who is the board's independent counsel on administrative law judge decisions, is also with us in the event board members have questions. And I do have 2 requests to move item 9A4 and 9A5 out of the first pass, Ms. Taylor. So we will come back to those items. Okay.
So I move to adopt the proposed decisions at agenda items 9A1 through 9A3 and 9A6 through 9A10 as the board's own decisions with the minor modifications argued by staff to agenda items 9A2, 3, 8, and 10, 8 through 10, I'm sorry.
I'll second that.
Okay, moved by Ms. Taylor, second by Mr. Miller. Mrs. Hopper, please.
Margaret Brown,
Aye.
Rob Fechner,
Aye.
Frank Ruffino for Fiona Ma,
Aye.
Lisa Middleton,
Aye.
David Miller,
Aye.
Stacy Oliveris,
Aye.
Irena Ortega,
Aye.
Jason Perez,
Aye.
Ramon Rubacava,
Aye.
Teresa Taylor,
Aye.
Shonda Wesley,
Aye.
Lynn Paquin for Betty Yee.
Aye.
Mr. President, I have 12 ayes for the motion being made by Teresa Taylor, seconded by David Miller on agenda items 9A 1 through 3 and 9A 6 through 10.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Hopper. The item passes. Now we go back to 9A4, Mr. Perez.
Mr. Shaw, can you, 984 to me is pretty confusing. And I read the summary and it looks like, and I'm sure you'll correct me because if I'm reading it incorrectly. So the city calculated this EPMC. We told them how to calculate it. Were we incorrect on how we told them how to calculate it? And is the member, should he be getting, I think it's a he, should this member be getting that benefit? You're on mute, sir.
Sorry about that. Good morning, everyone. Happy St. Patrick's Day. I have my green tie, Mr. Fechner, just for the record. Mr. Perez, those are excellent questions. The first, your point is correct that initially staff had given incorrect advice, but the Calpers staff has a legal duty under Section 20160 to correct its errors, and it corrected that error. And in so doing, it essentially complied with the board's regulation. And so as I read the proposed decision, as I read the regulation, I did a lot of research on this particular case. It's actually very difficult for me too, to wrap my arms around it. There's a tax qualification element to it. There's a lot of stuff going on in this proposed decision from a technical standpoint. But I assure you that the proposed decision is correct on the law itself. And that's why I'm recommending that the board adopt it.
Okay, sir, but can we do just a brief recap then of the incident or the case?
Yes, sure, absolutely. So basically, what happened here was that the city reported employer member contributions for this member and others as well. Staff had previously informed members that that the city was permitted to report those contributions in their highest final year of compensation. After reviewing the regulation, and staff corrected its error and said, pursuant to regulation section 566.1, that those contributions had to be reported during the final year of retirement. I'm not sure how the error occurred, but these errors do occur from time to time. And because staff has a duty to correct that error, staff corrected it, and that's what led to this appeal. Member did not agree with that, with the redetermination, if you will, by staff that the contributions had to be reported during the final year of final year of retirement. And that's what led to this appeal.
I get that, but the way I read that was kind of different than the way you explained. So initially it was calculated earlier in the year of his last year, right?
It was during his highest final compensation period. It was basically 2 or 3 years prior to his year of retirement. That is the advice that staff had provided.
Okay, so then we said no, it needs to be his final year.
That's right. So that's really what it comes down to. Yes.
Right. So we recalculated his final year, which is the way it should be done.
Yes.
Which wouldn't that be a higher amount?
You would. Common sense would dictate that, but that's not necessarily the case. The final compensation, in this particular scenario, this case, his highest final compensation period was actually a few years before his last year of retirement, and that's why the member is asking for, which is naturally you can understand why the member is asking for these contributions to be applied to his highest final compensation period, which was not the final year of retirement. In this case.
I see. I think I get it.
Okay.
So in a typical situation, if I may, I'm sorry, just briefly, typical situation, the final year of compensation is if last year of retirement coincides with the highest compensation period. So you probably in 90% of the cases, or I don't know what the number is, but most of the time you don't have, a dispute because those compensation periods coincide. In this particular case, his final highest compensation period was actually a few years before his last year of retirement. And so member is asking for that period to be applied.
And our contract with them is your last year of retirement, not your highest year.
Well, there's two things. There's the MOU, which has some language that's confirming the regulation, which it's actually could be clarified, but it does have language saying that it's the last year of retirement. But more importantly, it's the board's regulation that governs this determination. So the board has a regulation that says, for purposes of these employer-paid member contributions, the final compensation period must be the year preceding the year of retirement. And that really, at the end of the day, is what governs this dispute.
Okay, but human resources across the state, their departments don't have that regulation. So what does the MOU between us and Redondo Beach say?
We don't have the participation agreement, but again, the human resources departments do have the law and the regulation. This is they're published. The regulation and the law are both published, Pearl and its regulations. So they do have that.
Okay, so my question is then, is our contract with the city of Redondo Beach highest average of the last three, or your last year, or your highest year?
It's the last year. That's the final there's two things going on. There's the final compensation period for determining the member's compensation earnable, right?
Yes,
and then there's the question of the final compensation period for purposes of adding the employer-paid member contributions to the member's pay. And typically, you'll see that when you add the employer-paid member contributions, it'll be the last year of employment. In this case, his highest compensation period was a few years before his last year of employment.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Clear as mud.
Okay. Ms. Brown.
Thank you. I think the issue rests with the regulation 566.1. And so, Mr. Shroff, you can just, do you have that regulation? Can you read that to me? The concern I have is that when that regulation was probably written, we thought that the final year was going to be the highest year, and that's why we added the EPMC to that. But maybe what we need to do is work on that regulation because, in any other case, typically an employee's last year is their highest year, except unless, of course, they're disabled and they don't work as many hours or they don't get as much overtime and things like that. So, and that's, this is an industrial disability. So I'd like to just know a little bit more about that regulation and see, I mean, because this is rare occurrence and I don't want to harm somebody who should be having the higher pension if our regulation is just too restrictive. And that's what I'd like to know.
Okay, Mr. Sherrod, if you would also include added to Mrs. Brown's comment, but is the regulation that was promulgated as a result of the new PEPRA legislation?
Was this adopted under the PEPRA rules? I don't think so. This was prior to PEPRA. Okay. This is separate from PEPRA. Okay. There's two things I'll say respectively, Ms. Brown. I think you raised some really great questions. The issue before the board here today is whether the proposed decision should be adopted. And as a technical matter, the board is obligated to follow its regulations. Now, on a separate level, there's, of course, the board has total discretion to review its regulations and should be reviewing them from time to time to determine if they make sense. So may I suggest that be taken up independently, but my view is that as far as this proposed decision is concerned, the board has an obligation to adopt the regulation, which is being applied correctly under the facts of this case. And I can read it to you if you like.
No, I have a question for staff. And my question for staff is, how many of these types of cases do we see where we're adding the EPMC and the final year is not the highest year? I mean, because if this is a one-off or two-off, I want to vote no. And I want to go back and fix the regulation. So I want to ask staff that question. How many times do we see this happen?
That would be, this is Matt Jacobs. That would be a question for Mr. Sweeney, I think. But with respect to your final point, even if you changed the regulation, it would not typically apply retroactively.
Well, we could make a regulation that applies retroactively. We could go back 3 years or 5 years. We can do that.
There'd be a lot of issues with that, tax issues, federal tax issues, and the like.
Well, let's see how many people it impacts first. That's what I would like
Let's
to
see
know.
if Mr. Sweeney's available. There you go.
We can promote Mr. Sweeney, but Mr. Sweeney is, already indicated that this is a rare instance, but go ahead.
Yeah, it's a rare occurrence. I couldn't give you a number off the top of my head, Ms. Brown, but.
So Mr. Sweeney, how long have you worked in your area for Calpers?
Well, in this particular area, I don't know, 20 plus years.
20. How many times have you seen this in the 20 plus years?
Yeah, I'm not overly familiar with this scenario.
Right. So maybe one.
I will just tell you.
Yeah. Okay. I don't want to harm somebody with an industrial disability. I really don't. Thank you.
Okay.
Because our regulation did not see this issue coming. That's the concern. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so those are all the questions on that. So Mrs. Taylor, you want to go ahead and move 9A4?
Do we want to do both first?
Well, we're going to have other discussions, so I don't know where that one's going.
Okay, so I move to adopt the proposed decisions at agenda item 9A4 as the board's own decision.
Okay, moved by Ms. Taylor, second by, we have a second?
Mr. Jones, I had a motion before Teresa.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see it.
I didn't know you had a motion. I thought it was comments. Okay, well, hold up, Ms. Taylor. So what's your motion, Mr. Perez?
Well, since Teresa said it, do I do an alternate motion that we do not adopt the staff's proposal, and that we I don't know what the language needs to sound like, but I submit that we need to give this gentleman, I think it's a gentleman, his appeal.
It would be a substitute motion.
Substitute motion, yes.
Okay.
May I, Mr. President?
Yes, Mr.
So, Mr. Perez, the options for the board are either at this point to adopt the proposed decision, adopt it with minor modifications, remand the case to the administrative law judge for additional review, or schedule the matter for a full board hearing. The board doesn't have the authority to actually grant the case, but the board can send it back to the ALJ for a second look to determine, for example, one motion I might suggest to you would be to remand the case for the taking of the additional evidence regarding the application of regulation 566.1.
Okay,
so that would give an opportunity for the ALJ to review this matter again. Sorry, excuse me.
No, thank you. Then that's what my substitute motion would be, is to kick it back to the ALJ.
Okay, so that's the motion by Mr. Perez. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Brown. Okay, on the motion by Mr. Perez, second by Ms. Brown to remand this to the administrative law judge. Ms. Hopper, please.
No. Mr. President, I have a comment.
Oh, Mr. Fector? Yes.
Thank you, Mr. President. I guess I'm confused. If we all agree that the current regulations were followed legally, why does it make a difference to send it back to the ALJ? He made the decision based upon the regulations as they currently exist. If we want to change that, we need to schedule that differently. But how do we go back and tell him, look at it again when he did it right the first time? And we're being told that by the ALJ, by our staff, and by our independent consultant.
Yeah. That's a valid point. But the motion is on the floor, and so it's been second. So you can vote no.
Yeah.
Okay. So go ahead, Ms. Hopper.
Margaret
Mr.
Brown?
Chair,
Yeah. Go ahead.
sorry, I had a question. This is Irina.
Okay. Oh, Ms. Ortega. Okay.
Yeah, I have a, before we vote, I have a procedural question. So I agree with Mr. Fechner's point in terms of the futility of sending it back to the ALJ, given the regulation that's in place. If the motion was to have a full board hearing, does the board have discretion to do something different, or will we be locked into the same structure?
That's a question for me,
Mr.
presumably.
Jacobs or Mr. Schwab.
Yeah. Well, you know, that's a great question. I wouldn't want to prejudge it. If the board were to schedule the matter for a full board hearing, we would take a deeper dive into the case and give the board advice based on our review of the entire administrative record. Does the board have discretion? I mean, generally speaking, the board is fiduciary obligated to follow the terms of its regulations. How the facts of this case turn out, you know, upon a deeper review at a full board hearing is something that it would be premature for me to opine on at this point.
Okay, so Mr. Chair, I would offer a substitute motion to schedule this for a hearing before the board at a future date.
Okay, so that's
I would second that.
Okay, been moved by Ms. Ortega to schedule for a full board hearing at a future date. Second by Mr. Miller. So that's the latest motion on the floor. So let's take a vote on that. Mrs. Hopper, please.
Margaret Brown?
Aye.
Rob Fechner?
No.
Frank Ruffino for Fiona Ma?
Aye.
Lisa Middleton?
No.
David Miller?
Aye.
Stacy Oliveris?
Aye.
Irina Ortega?
Aye.
Jason Perez?
Aye.
Ramon Rubicava?
Aye.
Teresa Taylor?
No.
Shonda Wesley?
Aye.
Lynn Paquin for Betty Yee?
Aye.
Mr. President, I have a substitute motion made by Irina Ortega, seconded by David Miller, requesting that 9A4 go before a full board hearing.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Hopper. The item passes. So now we will move to item 9A5. Mr. Ruffino.
Thank you, Mr. President. So the previous case illustrates the treasurer's general concerns about this big question. Who should pay for pension mistakes? The legislature, they want to weigh in. Stakeholders, they want to weigh in because there is some concerns on how to address these mistakes. And the treasurer not only has this concern, but she is committed to work with the board and to work with Calpers to address the best remedy. Of course, Mr. Chirac said it best that this might be a regulation issue, that we may have to look at some of the regulation and propose some modifications to the regulation. And the treasurer is prepared to do that to present. So she understands that the technical issue on this case, and she gets it in terms of that we don't have, technically speaking, a choice. But at the same time, giving all the press and giving all the publicity that this, not just this case, but several cases related to mistakes are out there, I think we need to do a better job, and the treasurer feels we should do a better job in communicating with the cities, with the stakeholders about these complex, at times, these complex regulation and these complex rules. So, Mr. President, the reason why we pulled out was just simply to make some of these comments and to alert that the treasurer wants to find a way to quote unquote fix or address this question that's over our head, who pays for the pension mistake? With that said, thank you, Mr. President.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Ruffino. So that's a follow-up item, Ms. Frost, to have a discussion about addressing those questions that Mr. Ruffino raised from the Treasurer's office. Okay, so Mrs. Taylor.
All right, so we're going to move forward with this.
Yes.
All right. I move to adopt the proposed decision at agenda item 9A5 as the board's own decisions.
Oh, I'm sorry. Wait a minute, Ms. Taylor. I see another one popped up. Mr. Rubalcaba, I'm sorry.
I withdraw my comment. I was going to, no need to speak since we're going to vote on it. That's fine.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, Ms. Taylor. Go ahead.
Let me do it again. I move to adopt the proposed decision at agenda item 9A5 as the board's own decision.
Okay, moved by Ms. Taylor. Do we have a second?
Come on, guys. We don't want to pass this?
Oh, second by Ms. Ortega. Okay. Moved by Ms. Taylor, second by Ms. Ortega. Ms. Hopper, please.
Margaret Brown,
Aye.
Rob Fechner,
Aye.
Frank Ruffino for Fiona Ma,
Aye.
Lisa Middleton,
Aye.
David Miller,
Aye.
Stacy Oliveris,
Aye.
Irene Ortega,
Aye.
Jason Perez,
Aye.
Ramon Rubalcaba,
Aye.
Teresa Taylor,
Aye.
Shonda Wesley,
Aye.
Lynn Paquin for Betty Yee.
Aye.
Mr. President, I have all ayes. Motion made by Teresa Taylor, seconded by Irene Ortega on agenda item 9A5.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Hopper. So now we will go to the information agenda items, and the first one is 10A, state and federal legislation update. Oh, Mr. Miller.
Yeah, I wanted to make a quick comment after we had finished voting on this. And it kind of comes back to some of the comments that Ms. Brown and Mr. Ruffino and others have made. I think this is something, and I don't know in terms of direction exactly how to approach it, but I think this whole area is something we could use some additional discussion, maybe education. It seems, I see these patterns where we make decisions that at the end of it, we've got a bad taste in our mouth because, to me, the three kind of things come up. One is very complicated matters of decisions based on complicated law that are challenging for us, for staff, even for our esteemed council to advise us on. And yet members are supposed to figure this all out mostly on their own. And so the other thing is I see situations, and I've commented on this in the past, where the process is what ends up dictating the result, even though our sense of fairness or justice or what someone deserves aren't being met. And the examples I give are these situations where someone comes in with what they think is compelling evidence and what we may feel from their physicians, but they can't bring their physicians with them, and so it becomes hearsay. And I view those as almost tragic at times when we have to deny them benefits. And then finally, mistakes where they relied on expertise, and again, absent doubting that expertise and hiring a team of attorneys to try to figure out where there might be something they make irrevocable decisions that maybe only get addressed years later. And so those kind of three categories, I think we need to look into further. And it starts with, as Ms. Brown pointed out, just an understanding of how frequent are these when these kind of things happen, and what would the opportunities for us to address them in some way of improving, whether that be internally or with legislation or even just with more detailed instruction or counseling for people who want to appeal or something, or working with our employee representatives, who knows? But I think our members really deserve us to take a deeper dive, because all too often we make decisions that are in line with our fiduciary responsibility, but that do not feel fair or just to our members.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Miller. And Ms. Frost did take note that we're going to be bringing this back, and I think that discussion could be expanded to also talk about additional outreach that may be possible for our members.
Yeah, if you don't mind, Mr. President, I'd like to just make a comment on the comments that the board has presented so far. So we will work with Anthony and team to prepare an information item on all of the programs we have in place to assist our employers, either on the reporting side. And typically what we hear through these employer leadership dialogues is there's a lot of turnover in the positions that are reporting compensation to us. And that turnover is really problematic to the employers, because they believe it takes 6 to 12 months to get someone fully trained to understand all of the complexity in the Calpers rules. You blend that with the fact that we put in reducing complexity into our strategic plan 5 years ago. We've not made a lot of headway there, frankly. I think what happens is anytime we try or make an attempt to reduce complexity, it's perceived that we're trying to take away a benefit. So that has been a bit challenging, and you likely will not see that in the next strategic plan, unless as a result of this conversation, we decide to come up with some new initiatives. But that complexity score that comes to us from CEM benchmarking, Calpers is the most complex pension system in the United States by a large margin. And that complexity drives member confusion, and it drives employer reporting problems. We also have to train our own team, and it takes a full year to get one of our own team members fully up to speed on all the regulations and the statutes required for them to fully do their job. So this complexity is driving this environment where errors are more likely to occur. Now, thankfully, they don't occur that often. You are hearing, obviously, about the ones that are more egregious or the ones that are really bothersome to some of our members. But we're doing millions of transactions a year, and our error rate is very, very low. But we will provide all of this in an information item to the full board.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Frost. Okay, Ms. Wesley.
I'll make it brief. I want to thank all the board members who have made comments on this issue, specifically Mr. Ruffino. I think that there are a number of issues that we have to address, whether it is a local mistake or a CalPERS staff mistake. I'm really tired of our members being the ones who end up holding the bag and having to pay the price. And that's what we need to look at. And I can totally appreciate that it is a very small percentage of mistakes that happen, but when they do, they completely alter someone's retirement and their life and their family's mere existence. So it's something that we really need to take a look at, and how we solve this for the members that we represent. That's it.
Thank you, Ms. Wesley. Mr. Rubalcaba.
Thank you, Mr. President. I too want to weigh in and speak to that we have to be very concerned and sensitive to our members' impact when there's a misunderstanding or confusion or misguided information provided. I know that in other spheres, like 37 Act, right? 37 Act systems right now, they're going through a lot of turmoil where the system itself was implementing something they believed to be lawful, but the Alameda case determined that it was not lawful. And so there's an issue of perhaps going for recovering overpayments, which has to be done under law. And so I know that Mr. Brownlee is going to talk about SB 634. So I'm looking forward to that discussion. Perhaps there could be some language introduced there, or there is language already contemplated that would address some of these issues so our members are not harmed and the system is still protected. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Rubalcaba. Ms. Brown.
Thank you, President Jones. I just want to thank Director Miller for his comments. You've really boiled the issues down for the board in terms of, what's going on with some of these decisions and appeals. And I remember the first one you did in 2018 with the police officer who had the injuries, and it turned out she had the wrong doctor, and so they disregarded the wrong type of doctor, right? And they disregarded all that testimony, and the board overruled and gave this person their pension. And I have to tell you that I've never felt so good on this board. And when we made that decision, thanks to you bringing that issue up. And as a result of that, I've been reading all these cases and all the backup material, which is a lot to understand. And specifically on this case, 9A4, it appears that it's an arcane regulation. So it may have been calculated correctly by the ALJ, but we are costing this member their pension because we never assumed, the regulation didn't assume that the EMPC could be added, the EPMC could be added to his highest year, not his last year. And I think that's an easy fix for us, but we need to take a look at that. Additionally, we need training. We need more education, more training from the board. I know we're supposed to let staff do their work and the ALJ make their decisions, but if we're harming our members, then that needs to be corrected. And I appreciate you raising the larger issue that instead of these one-offs, but I think we can really help people and help our members by getting this additional education and fixing the arcane rules that harm our members. So thank you very much, Director Miller.
Thank you. Mr. Jacobs.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President and board members. I just had, following up on Ms. Frost's comment, I thought, and I don't know if this will work on Zoom, but I've got a visual representation of the complexity of these issues. Here is the current edition of the Pearl, so you can see how thick it is. This is the 1981 version of the Pearl. So if you just look at them next to each other, again, I don't know how well that comes across, but get some idea of the increasing complexity to the law that governs many of these issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jacobs. Ms. Middleton. Oh, Ms. Middleton, she has her, but she's gone. Oh, there she is. Okay.
The wonders of our electronic system and age. So thank you. And I thank all my colleagues for all of the comments that we've received. Everyone wants to be fair in these processes. And there's a great amount of difficulty that comes with that. I really appreciate Mr. Jacobs showing the differences in the two versions of the Pearl over the course of the last 40 years. And perhaps others may have different experiences than I, but almost every time that I have seen the law get more complex and the language get longer and longer, we're trying once again to create new law in order to address something that we found that went wrong, and we end up making the system more complex. And then we make it more complex. It's very important that people be able to rely on their pensions and on the calculations that they have. It's also extremely important, I think, as we found in the Alameda case, that the public perceive that the pension calculations are fair and that they're reasonable, and that there was no effort to take and create income that was not, in fact, earned or deserved to be included in a retirement calculation. Sometimes getting that balance right is a difficult process, but it's one of the responsibilities we have as public officials is to work to get that process right. One suggestion that's come to me from a very educated observer of the pension systems is that we revisit the process whereby a final calculation is given to a member at the time of their retirement. And that, and this would make for some additional work, but that Calpers work very closely with the member to make sure that all of the income as reported is in fact PERSable and correct. And if there are questions, we create then a challenged income that would then be resolved, but would not initially be used in the calculation of a retirement in order to not have someone retire believing that their pension's $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, whatever it may be, and then find that there was some part of their income that's just not correct. What can we do to make sure that when we issue a determination that someone's pension is going to be based on the following salary, we truly have that salary right, and we have resolved any questions that could come up before that first pension check is issued. So I don't think any of this is going to be easy, and I look forward to the conversation with my colleagues, our members, and all of our stakeholders, including the employers who ultimately foot the bill.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Miller. Yeah, and I think Ms. Marcy has identified, Ms. Frost has identified those issues that she will be bringing back for us to, not only in education for us, but also to see what steps can be made to have a greater outreach to our members, because that's the ultimate goal, just to make sure that the retiree is receiving what they're entitled to. And I think that's all of our goals. And we also have our stakeholders like RPA and California Schools Retiree Association. They do a lot of work in this area. So we need to make sure they are bought in on whatever strategies we're going to have, so they could also communicate to our members to be sure that we get it right. So, okay, Ms. Taylor, this is going to be the last one on this subject. Ms. Taylor.
Sure, and I just wanted to add complexity to the conversation that as these laws were made to, supposedly make things simpler, I think there are a lot of collective bargaining MOUs that add into that complexity. So, and I think on 9A4 that was mentioned that there was a collective bargaining complexity as well. But as a state employee, I don't even know whether or not it's a three. I mean, I think I know, but is it a 3-year average as a classic employee? Is it or 1 year? Last year with PEPRA, because now that PEPRA is in effect, how does that work for our PEPRA employees? So I think it is something, and I'm glad we're going through this, and I appreciate everybody's comments, because of course nobody wants to be unjust and take retirement away from our members, especially, this is what we're going to live on when we're retired. So it's important that we get this right, but there's a lot of stuff we need to look at, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Ms. Taylor. Okay, Mr. Brown.
Good morning, Mr. President and board members. I enjoyed the conversation. That large law book, though, that's called My Job Security. But I agree that it probably should be much smaller if we could get it there. So I am going to provide you with the state and federal legislative update On the state side, the legislature has largely finished its new bill introductions. So in your board material, you will see our current list of bills directly impacting the system. It includes both of our sponsored bills that have been introduced and have been referred to policy committees. AB 386 by Assemblymember Cooper is our private debt legislation, and it's in the Public Employment and Retirement Committee, which is chaired by Mr. Cooper, and that committee should have its first hearing sometime in mid-April. SB 634 is our other sponsored bill and the legislature's retirement policy omnibus bill. So it includes provisions related to Calpers, CalSTRS, and the 37 Act counties. We currently have 2 provisions in the omnibus bill, and that bill is scheduled to be heard next Monday on March 22nd. I know that Mr. Rubalcaba had mentioned that bill. I'm not familiar with the provisions in there dealing with the 37 Act counties, but it'll be something that we can take a look at and see if there's anything that we can take from those provisions. In addition to the sponsored bills on the list, we have another 29 bills that we're closely monitoring. At a very high level, 3 of these bills are investment related, including 2 divestment bills connected to the Republic of Turkey. We have 4 bills related to retirement, and the remaining 22 bills are all in the healthcare area. We are working with program team members to analyze the potential impacts to the system, our employers, and our members, and plan to bring several of these bills to you next month for positions. Of the bills we are tracking, only SB 278 by Senator Leyva has had its first policy hearing. This bill probably speaks directly to the conversations you were just having. This bill seeks to protect retirees from having their pensions reduced when it is discovered that a portion of their pension was based on disallowed compensation. Under the bill, if this occurs, the employer would be responsible for reimbursing Calpers for the overpayment and making the retiree whole for any future pension reductions. This bill passed out of Senate Labor, Public and Employment Retirement Committee on a 5-0 vote and is now headed to the Senate Judiciary Committee. There are 2 other bills I'd just like to bring to your attention quickly because they were in print after our board agenda item was finalized. First, it's SB 411 by Senator Cortese. This is regarding working after retirement. This is identical to AB 2365 from last year, which the board supported. This bill would allow us to streamline and more efficiently administer the working after retirement process. The second bill is AB 890 by Assemblymember Cervantes, which would require Calpers and CalSTRS to provide annual reports to the legislature on the status of achieving objectives and initiatives regarding participation of emerging and diverse managers. This bill appears to be fairly similar to the Emerging Manager Reporting Bill AB 181 that the board supported last session. Both of these bills are ones that we will likely bring to you next month for position. Moving to the federal update, the biggest news, of course, is the passage of HR 1390, Biden's American Rescue Plan Act that provides $1.9 trillion in COVID-19 relief, which among other things includes much needed aid in the amount of $350 billion to state and local governments. Of the funds allocated to California, it appears that about $26 billion will go to the state, $7.6 billion to counties, $7 billion to large cities, and $1.3 billion to small cities. The aid is meant to cover revenue shortfalls caused by the pandemic, respond to public health emergency and its economic consequences, and invest in water, sewer, or broadband infrastructure. The bill does prohibit this aid from being deposited into public pension funds or from being used to replace lost revenue due to tax cuts or providing a tax rebate or credit. Now, I know there was some questions, I think, raised on Monday, so there is sometimes confusion about whether the bill applied to public pension plans. There were provisions in the bill to provide relief to private sector, single and multi-employer pension plans, and provide financial assistance to the federal program that insures them. But there was nothing in these provisions or in the act itself that would directly impact public pension plans. Moving to some activity we've been involved in since our meeting last month. First, on February 25th, the House Financial Services Subcommittee on Investor Protection, Entrepreneurship, and Capital Markets held a hearing on climate change and social responsibility. James Andrews testified on behalf of Calpers and did a great job discussing why there is a need for comprehensive, high quality, consistent, and comparable disclosures of climate risk, charitable and political expenditures, human capital management, and board diversity. This type of data is critical to the long-term success of capital markets. Calpers has a second opportunity to testify before Congress tomorrow when Ann Simpson will testify before the House Financial Services Subcommittee on Diversity and Inclusion during a virtual hearing that's titled By the Numbers, How Diversity Data Can Measure Commitment to Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Ann will focus her comments on the necessity of standardized, decision-useful diversity disclosures as transparency into corporations' commitment to diversity, which is critical to capital formation with the objective of achieving the best returns and value for shareholders over the long term. While these hearings are an important step in moving these discussions and issues forward, it is unlikely any disclosure legislation will move through a divided Senate. But we are encouraged that Gary Gensler should be confirmed as the new SEC chair by the end of the month, and we expect him to be aggressive on these areas of disclosure. And just let me end by saying that last week we went on the record supporting two bills, one by Representative Maxine Waters, which is HR 1528, promoting transparent standards for Corporate Insiders Act. This bill would protect investors and public companies from insider trading and improve investor confidence in public capital markets. The other one is S588, called the Addressing Climate Financial Risk Act, authored by Senator Feinstein, that would improve the ability of federal regulators to understand and mitigate risk from climate change within the financial system. I anticipate we'll be taking more positions as more bills are introduced and bill markups begin. And with that, I'll stop and answer any questions that anybody may have.
Yes, okay, we do. Thank you, Mr. Brown. Mr. Ruffino?
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Mr. Brown, for the presentation. I have a quick question regarding a bill that, and forgive me if I missed it, but I don't see it on the report, and that's the AB 1133, which of course, this is a bill that will threaten the retirement security of new employees and undermine Calpers for all employees as well. So I'm not sure if that was maybe withdrawn, and I don't expect to go anywhere, but still, I'm just curious to know if you can comment on that. And then I have a follow-up question on another bill. Thank you.
I'll have to look it up. It doesn't ring a bell on the top of my head.
Chen, Assemblymember Chen. But okay.
Yeah, I would have to look it up and then I can get back to you. I don't know it off the top of my head, but it doesn't.
Sure. No worries. The other question, Mr. Brown, is just so that for clarity, the process, I want to understand a little bit better the process that we have in place for the board to take a position on a particular bill. The reason why I'm asking that is, for example, SB 278, I note that Calpers does not have a position in that, which it ties in. This particular bill, of course, as you are aware, it ties in exactly what the discussion that we just finished. And I'm just curious whether that was by choice or how is that we do not have a position on SB 278?
Well, we don't have a position because you're correct. We haven't brought it to the board yet. The board chooses the position on all of state legislation. So typically at some point in the year, once bills are introduced, we've had a chance to work with all of the different stakeholders or talk to authors, we would bring bills to the board. We have those discussions internally to decide which to bring to the board, but also the board, in many cases, have asked us to bring certain bills to the board. So, this is something that we could bring to the board if that's, they want to take a position on it. Otherwise, we just bring it up through the normal course.
Sure, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot, and that's not my intent, and by the way, but it just, assuming hypothetically that the board wanted to take an affirmative and wanted to take a strong position one way or the other, we missed an opportunity during hearing last week. And that's why I'm surprised, because this bill is, we should have been dive in, to understand it and to collectively as a whole, as the board, and whether or not we want to weigh in. Anyhow,
Yeah,
just
Mr.
a
Rufino.
quick comment. Yes.
Mr. Rufino, this report, we certainly footnote this report because the board has reserved the authority to take action on state legislation. So we do footnote this report every time we bring it forward to the board, that the board could take an information item and turn it into an action item and take a position on a particular bill. This bill, as we understand it, has to do with who's responsible for paying once Calpers does an adjustment to a benefit based on misreported compensation. That this bill addresses who should be the payer for that, understanding that Calpers must do the haircut on the actual benefit, but is the member responsible? Under current law, member would be responsible for the reduction of their benefit. They would own that in its entirety, regardless of whether it was an employer mistake or otherwise, which employers are the ones who are reporting compensation. Employees typically don't, have any role in that. Or should the employers, based on their own misreporting, be responsible for those ongoing payments? So it's a policy that the board could certainly take a position and decide to weigh in on. We have, at this point, we continue to monitor it to make sure that we can actually administer this as a benefit, because we are the administrator behind this. But on this particular policy, we're monitoring. We believe that we can administer whatever comes through the legislative process. But if the board wants to take a position on essentially who should pay, the board reserves that authority to do so.
Thank you.
You bet.
But to the point that, to address Mr. Rufino's comment about we lost an opportunity to weigh in. So this bill, and I just want a clarification from my own edification, is that the bill was listed in the document, so any board member could ask a question to bring it forward and ask you to, we could have a discussion so that we can take a position on it. I just wanted to clarify that, Mr. Rufino, that any bill that you think we should be taking a position, that staff hasn't opined that we should, you bring it up and we will have a discussion on it.
Correct.
Got it. Thank you, Mr. President.
Okay. Mr. Rubalcaba.
Thank you, Mr. Jones, Mr. President. Yes, Mr. Brown, I noticed on the list you have AB 845 Rodriguez, and and it deals with COVID and the response to COVID. We have basically a lot of a lot of our members who have to report to work. For example, people that work in the courts and other essential workers. Some of them have got COVID, and some of them have recovered fairly well, and some have passed away, unfortunately, and some have seen or will see their careers end because they're incapacitated or disabled. And so this bill is an effort to deal with that by having a rebuttable presumption that when they're applying for disability retirement, that if they had COVID, that it came from the workplace. And it's rebuttable, and it has a sunset date. And so I would like to have this bill brought forward for discussion and perhaps a vote of support at the next meeting. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, that's the direction. Okay.
And if I can just, I did have a chance to look at the initial bill that Mr. Rufino brought up, AB 1133, and this is something that we consider a spot bill, so that's why it wasn't on our list. And once we actually get some language, because the bill will not really refer to any particular policy committee until he actually puts language into the bill. So once he puts language into the bill, if he does, then it'd definitely be something that we would note on our list and bring to the board if needed.
And Mr. Brown, what was the bill number to Mr. Rubalcava's previous comment on the COVID bill? Which one was that? So I have that down appropriately as committee direction.
1184.
AB 845 Rodriguez.
Great, thank you.
And I would just, on that bill, I would just mention that while it definitely is a good bill, under current law that passed last year around workers' comp and making these workers' comp related injury, it's not likely that the Rodriguez bill is going to change anything for Calpers. These types of injuries or COVID would already qualify as work-related injuries for Calpers purposes and qualify for IDRs because of the way our law is written. So I don't know if this will prevent for members of Calpers. It may very well provide new benefits for members of other pension systems, but it's our understanding that this probably won't change anything as far as how we are administering IDRs.
Okay. I see no additional questions. I have one question, Mr. Brown, on the bill that you made reference to on the emerging managers. And I know that the prior emerging manager report where we had to report to the legislature had a 5-year sunset clause, but I had the understanding that while we won't necessarily be reporting to the legislature, but staff will be coming back to the board about our emerging manager program, a continuation of the provisions of that legislation. So it's a two-part question. One is this new legislation that you made reference to on emerging managers similar to that one that current Price had passed some time ago? And number two, am I correct that we will, the board will continue to receive information on our emerging manager program consistent with the current Price legislation?
So I can answer the latter piece of that, Danny, while you take a few moments to think about how to address it. The first part of the question, if you need to look at the actual bill language. But yes, Mr. Jones, we would continue to provide that data to the board on an annual basis, which was the policy or practice in the past.
Thank you.
The emerging manager bill, I mean, as it's written now, I would say it's very similar to the current Price. It does give us a little bit more flexibility because, we get to determine what our objectives and initiatives are. We also decide what is the definition of a emerging and diverse manager. The bill was just in print late last week. We're still trying to have conversations with the author's office to see what their intent is, to see if they're planning any changes, so forth. But otherwise, it's very similar to, like I said, what Rodriguez carried last year to replace Senator Price's bill. And it's kind of the same intent, just that, gives us the flexibility, but they still want us to be submitting a report to the legislature.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Anything else, Mr. Brown?
That is it.
Okay, so no additional questions from board members. So now we will move to item 10B, diversity report and framework, Mr. Pacheco and Ms. Diamalo.
Good morning, President Jones and members of the board. Excuse me, Brad Pacheco, Calpers team. This morning, I'm joined by my colleagues, Michelle Tucker, Chief of Human Resources, Kelly Fox, Chief of our Stakeholder Relations, Samiso Zima from our Investment Office, and as you mentioned, President Jones, Marlene Timberlake Diadamo, our Interim Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer. We're pleased to present to you our annual diversity report that captures the initiatives, programs, and accomplishments aimed at improving diversity and inclusion at Calpers. The report also provides an update on current workforce demographics, including new data on sexual orientation and gender identity that was requested last year. And finally, the team will walk through a new diversity and inclusion framework that will guide our work in talent management, healthcare, investments, operations, and our culture. Next slide, please. As we're all aware, the COVID-19 pandemic and the events that led to a national focus on systemic racism proved to be challenging this last year, but they opened doors for a renewed focus on diversity inclusion. Never have practices that bring people together around common goals been more important. At Calpers, we've embraced diversity and inclusion for nearly 2 decades, and our work has shaped the culture that contributed to our adaptability in the COVID-19 environment. It continually enables us to be customer-focused, operate efficiently, drive team engagement, be a reliable partner, and a best practice leader. Our work last year can be summarized in 3 focus areas that we'll talk about today: talent management, communications, and education. And now I'd like to turn it over to Michelle Tucker to cover talent management.
Thank you very much, Brad. It's a pleasure to be here, and good morning to members of the Calpers board. Michelle Tucker, Calpers team member. I'd like to discuss just a few of our accomplishments, and we've highlighted some of them here for the talent management focus area. I think we're on to the next slide. Thank you. So for the first time this year, we implemented a voluntary data collection for race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, and gender identity as part of our 4th annual employee engagement survey. The collection of this data is known as SOGI information. This year's survey had an 80% response rate, which was an increase from last year by 1%. And some of the highlights of the survey, which included that Calpers team members feel that they have a clear understanding of organizational goals and objectives. They know what is expected of them, and they feel the senior leadership team keeps them informed of Calpers matters. They're proud to work for Calpers, and that's a really important indicator when we look at what's called a Net Promoter Score for employees. Our team members recommend us as an employer to their family and friends. They value the positive relationships with their team leaders, and they feel that their team leader cares about them as an individual, and they're comfortable discussing important matters with them. Additionally, our new survey tool allows us to quickly implement pulse surveys, such as the COVID-19 survey, which allows us to keep track of emerging trends with our team members, and it significantly reduces the time between the survey results and the time where we can take meaningful action to address those results. Next slide, please. The COVID pandemic challenged our enterprise-wide to find creative, people-centric solutions to support our team members. The COVID-19 Pulse Survey, which I just mentioned, is one part of that, and that was launched to learn more about team members' perceptions of Calpers' response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Results from that survey were very favorable, with team members telling us that they have confidence in our leadership, they believe that our policies are being applied consistently, and that our communication methods are effective. Our developmental opportunities continue to be converted and delivered virtually, as highlighted on this slide, including graduating our 3rd Emerging Leader cohort in 2020 and selecting the 4th Emerging Leader cohort, which just launched in January of 2021. To date, 32% of all Emerging Leader program participants have promoted into higher level positions, and 29% of those participants have moved on to leadership roles. One of the achievements that I'm most proud of this year is the launch of the Calpers Upper Mobility Program. This is designed to support team members who are currently in lower paid classifications to help them develop and reach their goals to promote into higher paid classifications. The program that we've come up with and launched provides guidance through consultations and group presentations and helps internal talent develop the application and interview skills needed to successfully advance. This year's Upper Mobility cohort, which started in August of 2020, is comprised of 35 participants. 5 team members from this cohort have already successfully promoted into higher paying classifications. I'm really proud of the work that we've done as a team this year, and you'll find more of these talent management accomplishments listed in the board item itself. We continue to use LinkedIn to reach diverse candidate groups and are really looking to expand our offerings in the year ahead, as we'll cover a little bit later. So with that, I think it's back to you, Brad.
Thanks, Michelle. Next slide, please. Now I'd like to turn it over to Kelly Fox from our Stakeholder Relations to talk about our work around education and communication. Mr. Fox, I think we see you, but we can't hear you.
There, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm operating still off of the the phone with the call-in studio and trying to do this at the same time. So my apologies for that and for my casual attire, but it was the only green shirt I could find to wear in spirit of St. Patrick's Day. So thank you all. Let me change my screen here. Okay, so here on slide number 5, you'll see the participation rates for our ongoing diversity and inclusion education efforts, which we continue to expand and strengthen over the last fiscal year. So of special note, here is the amount of engagement with the unconscious bias training, which was provided in response to the events of last summer when systemic racism was in the forefront of our news cycles. Calpers' response was to educate our employees, and as you can see, the turnout was extremely high. Another topic that deeply affected many of our team members was mental health. While we have several mental health resources available to employees on our intranet, along with employee resource groups that are a great source of information and opportunities for thorough discussion, the Diverse Mind Workshop has proven to facilitate meaningful and lasting discussions. Next slide, please. So lastly here for me on this component is our communication. So we've increased our team member involvement and support through the Diversity and Inclusion newsletter, or DNI newsletter, with the help of our employee resource groups, which you'll see referred to as ERGs throughout the presentation. Externally, we provide guidance and share best practices with other state agencies and helped with the development of the new statewide committee on diversity, equity, and inclusion. So at this time, I believe we'll turn it over to Brad, and you can introduce our next speakers from the investment office.
Sure. Thank you, Kelly. Next slide, please. And now we're going to turn it over to Samiso for an update from our investment office.
Good morning, President Jones, members of the board, Simiso Nzima, Calpers staff. On Monday, during the board's investment committee meeting, I spent time updating the board around the progress that we've made in improving corporate board diversity. So I'm not going to rehash what I presented to the board on Monday. Suffice to say, I think the most important thing in that aspect is that the work around improving corporate board diversity is ongoing, and we're holding boards accountable where we are not seeing any progress. One point I also want to make here is that the information that we are seeing here is as of the end of June. So because this is a report looking at the fiscal year 2019-2020, whereas the information I presented to the board, to the investment committee on Monday, was based to the end of December 2020. So the information you had on Monday was really more updated. So what I'm going to do today is really to talk about some of the advocacy work, which is work which resides within Ann Simpson's group, the board governance team. And so on that, as mentioned earlier during the federal update, Ann Simpson is testifying tomorrow at the House Financial Services Subcommittee on Diversity and Inclusion. Again, this goes to the issue and some of the issues that we raised on Monday in terms of having the metrics and numbers in diversity data disclosures. So really on the advocacy front, we've been doing a lot. As you recall that our strategy, really our governance and sustainability strategy is implemented through integration, engagement, advocacy, and then also using partnerships. And in the last couple of months, Calpers has actually submitted comment letters. One, we submitted a comment letter to the SEC supporting the NASDAQ proposed change to its listing requirements way to require all companies on its US exchange to publicly disclose diversity statistics for their board of directors, and also to have at least 2 diverse directors under a comply or explain rule, of which one of the diverse directors self-identifies as a female and the other self-identifies as either LGBTQ or underrepresented minorities. And then the other aspect on our advocacy work, we have been advocating with SASB, the Sustainability Accounting Standards Boards, in terms of expanding the definition of financial materiality and including human capital management metrics. I sit on the SASB's Investor Advisory Group, so we actually have a sort of a direct input in some of their development of their accounting standards in that aspect. As well, when we think about partnership, we've also been working with under CII. I sit on the CII board, and CII also wrote comment letters supporting the NASDAQ proposed rules. In terms of Congress, in the last Congress, we supported 2 bills. I mentioned HR 5084, which is the Improving Corporate Governance Through Diversity Act, which was introduced by Representative Gregory Mix, which passed the House in 2019, but really didn't, it was presented to the Senate Banking Committee, but didn't go anywhere. But we did write a comment letter supporting that. And also, we also supported HR 5930, the Workforce Investment Disclosure Act. So really our advocacy work continues as to be part of this effort to improve diversity, not just at the, in terms of the companies that we're investing in, but broadly, and also to get more information around human capital management metrics. With that concludes my remarks for today.
Thank you, Samiso. Next slide, please. And Christina, if you could move forward to
Mr. Pacheco, just a minute. We have a question for Mr. Simo.
I can wait till the end, Henry.
Okay.
All right, thanks, President Jones. Next slide, please. As Mr. Fox mentioned, we do have employee resource groups that are made up of volunteers across the organization that support much of our work, and I'll ask Kelly just to talk about the updates related to our employee resource groups.
Thank you, Brad. So our employee resource groups, we have some accomplishments that we'd like to identify here and acknowledge. First of all, the increased engagement with both of our employee resource groups, our Calpers Diversity Inclusion Group, many times referred to as the CDIG, and our Calpers Disability Advisory Committee, referred to as our CDAC. Membership participation grew to approximately 300 members, an increase of over 200% from last year. And just want to call to your attention that these are all voluntary programs. Members take their time, or in some cases, with the authorization from their supervisors, their ability to participate in these 1 hour to 90-minute per month meetings. So the average meeting attendance was 62 attendees, which again, an increase of 210% from last year. And we also have an increase of 338% of team leaders and executives, which has been a target and objective for our group, is to increase team leader participation. And then a real wonderful honor here was the 2020 DAC, or Disability Advisory Committee of the Year Award, which we won this year, and it was awarded by the Association of California State Employees with Disabilities. So congratulations to that group on that esteemed award. Next slide, please. So our Erg Collaborations. So the ERGs, again, a voluntary group gets together at least monthly, and we have combined the CDIG and the CDAC have combined meetings monthly. So they supported the Accessibility Gap Initiative, which was one of our initiatives through our strategic plan to try to find out where our gaps are with our services to our accessible access for all of our members, team members. So we help team members with disability-related issues, especially with accessibility in a COVID pandemic culture. And we've curated a D&I resources intranet webpage called Read, Watch, and Act. So those are, that concludes my part of the presentation. At this time, I'll turn it over to Michelle Tucker, our division chief for HR. So Michelle.
Thank you very much, Kelly. All right. Okay, I'm happy to be here again to go over some workforce demographic information with all of you. Okay, so I see the slide. We can go to the next slide. Oh, I apologize. I'm one behind. Please go backwards. Sorry. All right, so Calpers does rely on demographic data that's collected by the State Controller's Office to inform the organization of our workforce gender and ethnicity profiles. This is consistent with all state agencies. The information is entered when employees are appointed into the State Controller's Office system, and then it's accessible for all state agencies to use for reporting purposes. We work with CalHR and SEO on this reporting aspect. However, for the first time this year, Calpers collected voluntary data on race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, and gender identity information from team members through our 4th annual employee engagement survey. As I mentioned earlier, our survey had an 80% response rate this year, which was an increase of 1% from the prior year. And our strengths included team members feeling that they understand our organizational goals and objectives, they know what's expected of them, they feel the senior leadership team keeps them informed, they're proud to say they work for Calpers, and they value the positive relationships with their team leaders and feel heard and comfortable discussing concerns with team leaders. Approximately 75% of the team members who responded to our survey were willing to voluntarily reveal the next level of the SOGI information about themselves. So the slide that you see before you now is the first snapshot of that. Workforce demographics and how they're used to inform our diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies are constantly evolving. We pride ourselves on continually looking for opportunities to strategize and refine our focus in this area. This year, a good example of that is that we added a dimension to our annual employee engagement survey, which allowed for self-disclosure of additional demographic information, such as ethnicity, gender identity, and sexual orientation, which you will see highlighted in this and then the next slide. We hope that by gathering this information, we can have a better understanding of the makeup of our team members and encourage them to bring their whole selves to work. We've heard from our survey provider, Perceptics, that we're on the cutting edge of gathering this type of information. Perceptics has shared with us that many of their clients are just beginning to ask for this information to survey it and tabulate it, so we really are on the forefront. We're scheduled to discuss our engagement survey outcomes and action planning steps in the April board meeting. Next slide. So this year, through our annual employee engagement survey, we did ask team members to voluntarily report out on ethnicity, sexual orientation, and gender identity information. This slide is the breakdown of that data that's been collected. You'll see that 79% of team members who responded to the survey were willing to voluntarily reveal their gender or gender identity information, and of those, 72% were willing to share the next level of SOGI information about themselves by providing their sexual orientation. I think the most important factor I'd like to highlight on this slide is the response rate. This demonstrates to us the trust that our team members have exhibited in providing Calpers with this individual information. We hope that year over year, we'll be able to build these demographic data sets to help influence our DEI strategies. We're going to work hard to show our team members that we really appreciate them sharing this information with us and honor the trust that they've shown, and we'll act on their feedback. We hope that we'll see an increase in our response rates to these questions in our annual employee engagement survey, and we'll be looking for other measurement tools to help validate that we're headed in the right direction. We'll continue to work with our survey provider, Perceptics, to identify best practice and emerging survey trends and tools to keep Calpers a leader in gathering this information. Next slide, please. In 2016, we established a new workforce diversity and inclusion strategic measure as part of our strategic planning process. And this was to focus on the employee engagement survey questions specific to diversity and inclusion. Our target goal was to increase the diversity and inclusion engagement score to 74% by 2022. So just as investment returns fluctuates, we do expect to see fluctuations from year to year, which you can see on the slide in front of you. But our outlook is positive, and we're trending upwards to raise our engagement scores. Our move to a new survey platform will allow us to monitor these engagement scores more closely and check in throughout the year with pulse surveys. We'll continue to actively work to keep these items on the forefront and top of mind and continue our upward trend. Our response rate to these questions will be one of the metrics used in the new diversity, equity, and inclusion framework that we'll share next. So with that, I can turn it over to Marlene Timberlake-Diadamo. Marlene?
Good morning. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Thank you. Marlene Timberlake-Diadamo, Calpers team members. Over the next dozen or so slides, thank you, I will walk you through the foundation, structure, and philosophy of our diversity, equity, and inclusion framework. The framework itself continues to be a work in progress, as I will mention several times through this presentation, that our process is iterative and will be continuously improved and refined as we learn from the initiatives we are undertaking and monitoring their impacts, much of like what Michelle just stated in terms of activities. At the outset, I would like to recognize the many individuals that contributed to the deep thinking and honest conversations had over the past several months. I'd like to start with my fellow team members in Human Resources. Thank you, Michelle. The Calpers Diversity Outreach Program. Thank you, Brad and Kelly. The Health Team. Thank you, Dawn and Dr. Logan. Board Governance and Sustainability. Thank you, Anne. The Investment Office. Thanks, Dan, Simiso, and others. And our Operations Support Services Division. Thank you, Dallas and team. In addition to the group efforts, I would like to acknowledge the many people who contacted me individually to discuss their perspectives, concerns, and views, all respectful and all with the desire to provide input and be heard, and those who participated in the several conversations the organization has engaged in during the development of our framework. Last year, Calpers committed to developing a diversity, equity, and inclusion framework, DEI as Marcy referenced, that would strategically plan, implement, and coordinate the actions currently undertaken and those to occur as part of the plan. The DEI framework is the first coordinated and centralized attempt to document our efforts across the entire organization. I wanted to start this presentation with a brief discussion of the philosophy that underpins the development of the framework. The term foundational indicates that at its core, this framework is intended to build on basic principles that we as an organization have established. As an example, we are embarking on several organization-wide activities like unconscious bias training that level set the understanding of these topics for our team members as they engage with members, stakeholders, and vendors. This is an iterative process and will be refined and tightened as we see the results. I think of this document and our framework as a living document. It is put forward so that we can be held accountable for the commitments we make and you can see where we are going. On aggressively inclusive, we believe that in order for this framework to be successful, we need to own it, all of us. The success of our framework depends on a deep commitment to our goals, and there is no better way to ensure the full implementation of our framework without a strong and steady march towards inclusivity. I know that the only way to get and keep participation of the many groups impacted by this framework is to include them in the development. Throughout this process, we have not only consulted with the program areas who participated in the development of the goals, objectives, and initiatives, but we've held several organization-wide conversations regarding the framework and the role of our team members. Next slide, please. With this next slide, I wanted to provide information regarding the inputs to our framework. Those of you who know us well know that the individual sets of beliefs listed on these slides frame, to a large extent, the way we think about our work, how we operate to achieve those results, and provide a basic grounding or North Star for achievement of our mission and as an expression of our values. Data-driven research must inform and guide our framework efforts. Long-standing research shows that diverse teams perform better. Next slide, please. Our framework will focus on 5 categories. These categories were selected based on the intersection of our mission and values. Our mission, as stated previously, is to pay pension and health benefits to members and their beneficiaries. Calpers has 6 core values: quality, accountability, respect, integrity, openness, and balance. These are the 5 themes. Next slide, please. Said very succinctly, culture represents the norms, customs, and characteristics of a group of people. The goal is to incorporate DEI best practices into Calpers' culture. This is in no way to imply that there is a problem with our culture. In fact, Calpers is a destination employer within the state, and part of that view is in fact due to our culture. As you know, however, there is always room for improvement. And by focusing on culture in our DEI journey, we believe that we can improve our culture and thus improve retention, recruitment, and continue to remain a destination employer. The first bullet describes an initiative that will allow real-time assessments of employees' views on Calpers culture. This is a lot of which was discussed by Michelle Tucker previously. This will allow us to ascertain the immediate benefits of our DEI efforts. The second bullet refers to the employee resource groups, which are fundamental to increasing the inclusiveness felt by team members. And a few minutes ago, Kelly Fox went into a lot of detail about the activities that we're doing there. Next slide, please. The first initiative here stems from the learning that we've been doing regarding these very important elements: respect, a core value of Calpers, equality, trust, and inclusiveness. Each of these elements represents a key contributing factor to team member engagement and can help us to understand the perspectives that contribute to overall to our culture. I would argue that a strong culture would not be able to thrive without these elements. Education consists of unconscious bias training in 2020, and there will also be training in 2021 and 2022. With this and the many other educational offerings, the idea here is to keep the DEI education current and accessible. The next bullet speaks to the importance of education and communication to culture. This would be bullet number 2. Through our Go Learn system, we offer a multitude of online education and training opportunities, some of which were mentioned by Michelle Tucker in the previous segment. Our Calpers Diversity Outreach Program through its website also offers online access to research, training, and education. The third bullet references the development of opportunities for team members to collaborate with one another and to build cultural understanding. The last initiative is about engagement and inclusiveness. Next slide, please. On talent management, at a high level, the goal of a performing, equitable, and diverse workforce directly contributes to the mission and our core values. Why does this matter? This is part of the best-in-class desire to ensure that there are processes which ensure equity and inclusiveness with respect to recruitment, retention, and succession planning. Said another way, it's about team member development. The philosophy here is to review HR processes related to the team member employment cycle and to ensure that those processes include best-in-class DEI processes as well. Next slide, please. This is part of the foundational delivery of programming that will be implemented. As noted, 2020 saw the offer of unconscious bias training, and I'm very happy to say, as Kelly stated, more than 1,600 Calpers team members completed this particular training. In addition to the unconscious bias training, several other trainings are offered to team members. Calpers uses an online system called Go Learn, which I mentioned, which allows us to assign and track training. The digital nature of the system allows us to easily add trainings as a way to provide increased opportunities for team members. This second bullet is self-explanatory. A foundational concept to understand in this space is for team leaders to understand how their actions and awareness impacts their teams. The idea here is for team members to improve their own awareness related to DEI and thus to help their teams become stronger. For the past year, we've been engaging with team members on what DEI means to them. We have learned about others' experiences and their perspectives regarding how to develop our talent towards greater awareness and engagement. A hallmark of the framework's philosophy is to acknowledge that DEI education can occur both individually and as a group effort. The foundational training, for the most part, begins as group efforts. It's where large numbers of individuals can experience the fundamental concepts together in a diverse setting to help recognize and understand diverse people. Calpers has a saying, which is, "Our differences are our strengths," and we live by this. The concept of a certificated education series in diversity will allow individuals to learn about diversity and inclusion in a structured way and allow them to get education credits for their study. The goal of the program is to help individuals understand their environment and learn how to overcome issues while working towards appropriate solutions. This program will allow team members to move at their pace while earning credit. Next slide, please. These initiatives are quite specific and have been selected in recognition of the many other factors that contribute to creating and maintaining a diverse and inclusive workforce. Here are some of the initiatives that are designed to improve the hiring process. Comprehensive review of the processes used to recruit potential team members. That's bullet 1. The redaction of demographic information is considered a great way to quote unquote blind application materials to ensure that experiences shine in the application process. There's a large body of HR and organizational research which demonstrates that bias can creep in without ill intent when names are known, as they can be indicators of age, gender, or ethnicity. Similar bias can occur with education, like alma mater affinity or bias. Bias for formal education can cause barriers. So this is tied to our year 1 goals stated in slide 26 for the hiring and selection of implicit bias training. Research has suggested that language, not surprisingly, plays a large role in determining whether diverse applicants respond to job openings. This effort is meant to broaden the potential universe of applicants. This would be bullet number 3. And the last bullet is very important. What this looks like is assessing the evaluation processes to ensure that DEI principles are incorporated and that the processes are free from bias. I can't overstate how important this step is in demonstrating to our team members that there is a mechanism in place to ensure that processes are fair. Many of our performance review processes now have ratings for leadership qualities, support of EEO principles, effective workforce, and succession planning. This measure will review current state and make adjustments where needed. Next slide, please. Health equity was selected as a theme due to the very large role Calpers plays in providing health benefits to more than 1 million people. Our health program is a cornerstone of our mission and is a responsibility that this organization takes very seriously. Both the goal and the objective selected are geared toward the improvement of health outcomes for those we serve. Health, particularly good health, with opportunities to achieve the best outcomes, is fundamental to life. Good health, including education and managing health conditions, have a significant impact on the rest of our lives, what we're able to achieve, our longevity, and the quality of our life. So how are we going to do this? Next slide, please. In 2 steps. First, understand the current state of health outcomes achieved by our members and their families. To do this, we will engage in a campaign to collect health demographic information regarding our members. The data, dubbed Real SOGI, similar to the SOGI that Michelle talked about, is specific to and allows us to assess the achievement of outcomes by demography. The real SOGI components are those unique identity qualifiers that can be impacted by diversity and inclusiveness. This effort actually began in January of 2021. The last bullet is essentially creating a benchmark or metric against which we can evaluate the data as it relates to our specific member demographics. What I love about this approach is that we are utilizing the real data of our members, and we will be helping to identify areas where the outcomes do not comport with expectations based on real SOGI demographics. Ideally, our goal is for our members to have the opportunity for health equity as measured against the population. We expect that using the data and our efforts to identify discrepancies will help outcomes improve for our members and their families. Next slide, please. Phase 2, as I call it, of this plan is to use the data collected to identify specific initiatives that health plans can undertake to address areas of inequality. This can be done through engagement with plans, amendments to the plan contracts, detailed reviews of, and stepped up use of member surveys with an awareness of trends and tracking against real SOGI data. Additionally, more close review of formal processes like grievance and appeal to better understand member experiences related to health equity, including access and cultural competence. Cultural competence could be how well a plan undertakes to communicate with and address the particular or specific needs of a group. History is important here, and how well a plan and providers connect with a diverse population can have a direct impact on the overall outcomes experienced by those groups. The last initiative is an example of how specific this work can be in order to create alignment between Calpers and the provider universe for health outcome expectations. This last element of this initiative regarding the establishment of standards for assessing equity and quality in healthcare delivery. This is essentially where I think the rubber meets the road. It is the entire reason why this is important and points to how we plan to work with the health plans regarding the evaluation of health outcomes. Benchmark standards set expectations. Expectations are the building blocks of expected outcomes. Equity and quality in the delivery of healthcare is tantamount to improving life. And at the end of the day, the implementation of the initiatives, when met, will improve lives. Next slide, please. This theme was selected based on 2 factors. First, remember that our criteria for engaging on topics is that we want to engage in areas where we can have a meaningful impact. That is why culture and talent, health and investments rose to the top of the list. Contracting also fits the bill because we do business with a lot of organizations. Our identified goal is to have a high-performing supplier diversity program. So what does this mean? For us, our first objective is to better understand our supplier community through the lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion. How will this help? Similar to our approach in healthcare, the first step for us is to understand the supplier community. Next slide, please. The initiatives that were selected were done with a vision of improving and deepening the relationships we have with our suppliers. This effort begins with understanding who our vendors are and what is important to them in their relationships with Calpers. As important as understanding where we can expand the pool of potential suppliers. The last 2 initiatives are meant to improve the relationships we have with SBE and DVBE vendors in an effort to ensure that they understand how to engage and contract with Calpers. Next slide, please. The goal here is basic, but the efforts are not, as demonstrated by Samiso and Ann earlier today, as well as on Monday in the conversations. Our goal as a long-term investor is to leverage the DEI framework and Sustainable Investments Program to improve investment outcomes. Like our efforts on the health side, our interest is to take the steps necessary to eke out every opportunity to improve returns. The objective should be recognizable given our significant efforts at improving greater diversity on boards at the companies with whom we invest. This objective represents more of the how regarding our strategy to improve diversity. It has been long recognized that diverse teams perform better and that better performance leads to higher investment returns. Next slide, please. This slide references Calpers' mission to deliver retirement healthcare benefits to members and their beneficiary, and ties the completion of the mission to one of our investment beliefs. Belief number 4 states that long-term value creation requires the effective management of 3 forms of capital: financial, physical, and human. The Calpers Investment Office has a long history of leveraging its beliefs toward achieving its goals related to sustainable investment outcomes. Other research includes papers by academics and scientists and human resource associations, studies done by major consulting organizations and management firms, which have led to action plans created by corporations, certificate programs offered by academic institutions, and a plethora of other tools created and developed to help organizations improve their performance through implementation of DEI practices. And I will note that in addition to the investment beliefs, part of our guiding framework includes the governance and sustainability principles, the Sustainable Investment Strategic Plan update, and climate change investment strategy. Next slide, please. Almost done. This slide was referenced on Monday as part of the strategy that the investment office is undertaking. The framework is not just a moral imperative. There is a strong investment case for being inclusive. We believe that diversity helps companies improve their performance over the long term. And it has been mentioned, we have been participating this month, particularly on advocacy meetings regarding topics around human capital and sustainable investments. We consult regularly also with our partnerships, including the Human Capital Management Coalition and the range of groups listed on this slide who support the D&I work within the investment office. This slide utilizes the channels that this slide illustrates, the channels that Calpers utilizes regarding our sustainable investment strategy. Yesterday's conversation was deep. Monday's conversation was deep with descriptions of how we use advocacy, like SEC testimony, as described by Anne, engagement, as described by Samiso, and integration, also as described by Anne. The investment case is supported by extensive research we reviewed with the Sustainable Investment Research Initiatives, 1 and 2, with 3 in progress. We implement this work through partnerships with the group listed at the bottom and represent a wonderful way to leverage our thinking and relationships. On the right side of the slide are some examples of how the work is implemented and represented. We know that the issue is complex, and we're currently reviewing submissions in order to commission the new research as mentioned on human capital management. With respect to our investment managers, we use the ILPA model template for including ESG and diversity and manager due diligence, and conduct DEI surveys to gain a better understanding of our external managers. Within the integration channel, several initiatives are underway, including a refresh of our emerging manager program strategy. We're under no illusion that this will be easy, and it's certainly not a one and done. Next slide, please. So what are we going to do? Here's a short list, if you will, of what we deem to be the next steps regarding further development and implementation of the framework. The next set of specifics, namely more refined objectives, measures, and benchmarks regarding the objectives, is really, again, where the rubber meets the road. We believe that our framework should have enough specificity so that outcomes can be measured and we can track the impact of our actions to ensure that we are achieving the objectives as desired and planned. We know that this will be an iterative process, and through the framework, we are committing to this work. The next several bullets lay out some of the activities we will engage in over the next 6 months as we bring our framework to life. This is hard work, no doubt, but like most things in life, the real reward comes from the activities that are the hardest to complete. I have a saying, and it's quite simple, but sums up our approach in this effort. which is hard work pays off. And we intend for our efforts to pay off through better organizational performance, engaged team members, improved investment returns, and better health outcomes for our members. Thank you for your time and consideration. And with that, I would be happy to take questions.
Henry, you're muted.
Yeah, I know. I was getting the screen, moving the screen out of my view. Okay, just a second here. Okay, great. Well, first of all, I want to thank you, the team, for a very comprehensive and complete report on our diversity and inclusion work. And it's good to get update on existing data, and I think most importantly, though, as you outlined, of the future. And that's what's going to determine how successful we are in terms of this whole effort of diversity and inclusion going forward. Now that we have a new person in charge of that, we look forward to looking at some of those statistics that you talked about, how we're going to measure going forward, because if you can't measure, we don't know how we're doing. So I'm very encouraged to see that we have some tools that we're going to be using to see how successful we are. And before I ask my other question, I'll go to, because Ms. Taylor had a comment first for Samiso. I'll let her go and then I'll come back to my questions. Ms. Taylor?
Well, if you let me start, I'm going to go for the whole thing. So you might want to repeat your question.
Oh, okay. Okay. But no, that's okay, because mine is in different places too. So I know now we have a whole lot of people, so I'll call mine to last. Okay, go ahead, Ms. Taylor.
Thank you. So I just want to thank the team for this report. I'm very impressed. I was taking lots of notes. It looks like a mess. But what I really appreciate is this new initiative that we're looking at with that Marlene just covered, the culture, talent management, health equity. Thank you. Supplier diversity, investments. I'm very happy to see all of this and the goals as we're moving forward. If we're going to make any progress, we have to address all of these issues. So very thoughtful, and I'm hoping very successful. It looks like we've got a lot of tools. And one of the things I was, it's just so important that we do that. The first thing is, it's so important that we do this for Calpers, because as we move out into the investment world that we've been talking about, diverse managers forever, we can't be not doing what we're asking them to do. That's number one. And then Marlene, before I get to Samiso, I just wondered, one of the questions I had, because I think you've got a really good strategy moving forward about hiring, talent management, how that works. How are we measuring success that once these diverse candidates are hired, that they're moving into leadership roles, and they're being supported as they move through these leadership roles? And are we tracking that? I see at the end of the presentation, there's statistics on who's holding leadership roles, right? And it's still obviously the majority white. Okay, so how are we supporting, or moving forward even, how do we support these diverse employees? And how are we keeping track of that so that we're making sure that we're doing that? Because I represent a lot of folks in our building, obviously. So I want to make sure that our African Americans, our Hispanics, our Asian Americans are all being supported in moving into leadership, and that we support their journey in their career, and then also keep statistics on how we're moving, how they're moving forward in their careers. So we get them hired in, we're having a better diverse candidate pool. Then what do we do with them once they're here? So that's what I would like to see sort of fleshed out a little bit. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Marlene?
I do, and I'm sure Michelle does as well. To answer your questions, I would say yes, yes, and yes. We recognize that in broadening the candidate pool and bringing a diverse team in, it's not, and I've said this a couple of times, this is not a one and done. This is, sort of doing things, measuring, putting refinements in, making sure that you're picking up all the things that you expect to do. And so one of the bullets references looking at the employee life cycle. That means looking at how we're developing people, it means making sure that we're supporting people. It means that we are helping people understand what it takes to promote and having them have the tools available to do that. And Michelle spoke about that in terms of, all the other things that we do, but this is a particular thing that we will engage in as part of this talent management because we recognize that it's important. And the other part of it is that with retention, I mean, it's bringing people in, it's retaining them, it's developing. It's not just a one-time thing or a one offer, but you have to make sure that you're implementing stuff all along the way to keep people engaged and to make sure that they're developing in the way that they expect to develop. And I'll stop and see if Michelle has anything that she wants to add.
Yeah, thank you, Marlene, and thank you for that question, Ms. Taylor. So one of the things that we highlighted in, I think, the middle of the presentation, we went over some of our new questions on our survey. So I think that will absolutely tell us not only where people are moving, but how they feel about the respect and the opportunity that they're afforded within the organization. So I think that will be one really critical aspect of it. When we talk about measuring diversity, we are looking at age, we're looking at gender, we're looking at sexual orientation, we're looking at ethnicity and race. And so we do want to measure all of that and provide opportunities for people to bring their full selves to work. I think one of the ways that we will see if we're successful also is just in looking at this data from year to year to see if we are adjusting the needle. But we've also looked at some long-term recruitment strategies. I mentioned a little bit about some of the work we've done on LinkedIn. So we're looking to find, really a number of different diverse organizations that focus on different identity groups as we do recruitment. We are really proud of the upper mobility plan this year, which specifically looks to provide upper mobility for people who may not have previously had opportunities or access to those upper mobility paths before, as well as our emerging leader program. So those both provide a bridge for our team members. Some of the talent initiatives that Marlene went over on the framework included training for team leaders or anyone who would serve on an interview panel for ways to be aware of implicit bias, how it can enter that process and how to kind of act and guard against it. We're talking about redacting names, and not only names, but other identifying information like alma maters and things like that from applications. And then using language tools to make sure that the language that we post in our advertisements and our external communications do not deter any particular group from applying or being interested or feeling like they would be successful and part of our team. So I think those are some of the ways that we will measure progress and know if our efforts have been successful.
Hold on. Great, thank you. I agree, and I just want to make sure, as I've talked to my own members over there, in my other role, my other hat that I use, that we are making sure that these folks have opportunity to move up, that they're not, it's hard in large organizations like Calpers or where I work, because we have so many employees that it's hard. It feels like people feel like they fall through the cracks. So I want to make sure that we're tracking that we're, like you said, we've got tools to make sure that we're following these folks through the life cycle of their careers and giving them the opportunities. If they don't avail themselves of those opportunities, that's a different story. But I just want to make sure that we are recognizing that their talents, because in a large organization, a lot of times that's what gets lost, right? We fail to recognize these diverse candidates and their talents because it's such a large organization. So I just want to make sure that we're even we see this, right? But where are we, as I'm looking at page, 38 on the iPad, are we looking at, okay, X amount of Asian, Hispanic, in terms of moving up the ladder? Do we want to keep track of that kind of stuff? So that's where I'm just kind of pushing a little bit and making sure we do that. And I think it sounds like you're trying to do that. So I do appreciate that. And then I just wanted to go on. I also am very impressed that you're also inclusive of, so these aren't siloed. The investment office and Calpers itself is not siloed away from each other, and the investment beliefs and such. And I just want to give kudos to Samiso again, because I've already done it on Monday on our diversity and inclusion program through the investment office and the work that we're doing, the advocacy work with the SEC. Marlene, I think, just talked about the Human Capital Management Coalition and the testimony that Anne's going to be doing that James already did. So I just wanted to give kudos again over our work and also kind of push again to go a little deeper, and that requires those statistics that Samiso was talking about that we would need from the SEC, the reporting statistics, to see what these corporations, not just at the C-suite, are doing, but what they're doing with their employees all the way down into the corporation. So again, I want to thank you. This was really well thought out, really well done. Very proud of you guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Taylor. Mr. Rubalcaba.
Thank you, Mr. Jones, Mr. President. Congratulations to the team for this great work you're doing, and I'm looking forward to the next follow-up report in the fall. And I also want to speak. I was particularly pleased and impressed that that there was work with Marlene. You mentioned there was work with the health plans on health equity and cultural competency, and that is a very important initiative. One thing that Dr. Daphne stated yesterday in the Pension and Health Benefits Committee was that she has always looked at CalPERS as a leading example in the health industry, health delivery system, and to our members. And I'm glad that this is an avenue that we're pursuing. And I really am pleased to see that, and I congratulate the team again, and also the CalPERS management for fostering this and letting it nest within. And so thank you all, and continue the work, and looking forward to the continued good work. It should make us stronger, and I like our difference is our strength. I like that. Thank you very much, everybody. Continue, please.
Thank you, Mr. Rubalcaba. Ms. Paquian.
Thank you, Mr. President. I also wanted to commend the staff and say thank you so much for all this work. And I know that CalPERS has always been a leader in diversity efforts, and we've had a lot of programs, and it's amazing to see what you've done with where we were to where we are today and expanding and building upon that success. So congratulations to you all. I had just a couple of questions, and the first one is on the Upward Mobility Cohort Program, which is a fantastic program. And just curious, is this going to be on an annual basis? So will your next class begin in August? And is it a year-long program? And do you expect to expand the number of slots?
Thank you, Ms. Paquin, for that question. I'm happy to respond to that. So yes, we do envision the Upward Mobility Plan as being an annual program. We had an application period this summer for team members to participate. They had to submit various documents. They had an interview process, and it's gone really well. They've had a number of different educational sessions. They've also each had an individualized consultation with our Career Services Unit. So we go over their application, their background, their experiences, any education, and they really help them customize a plan for their future growth and development. So it's gone really well. I think if we're able to expand the number of participants, we would like to. But yes, we've been really pleased with the success of this and really proud of it.
That's great. Thank you so much. And my other question is on the investment side for Samiso, and appreciate the report that you gave to us on Monday. And I think you had mentioned, I think it was a group of 800 companies that you have been focused on engaging with over the past 4 or 5 years on diversity issues. So with respect to additional diversity engagements, are you planning to go back to the same core group of companies, or are you planning to expand that, and what will that look like?
Thank you for the question, Ms. Paquin. Yeah, so the 800 companies, those are cumulative. So each year we actually add companies in terms of, we look at the Russell 3000, and we're using gender as a criteria because that's the only data that we have. But when we actually engage the companies, we use the broad diversity definition in terms of what we're asking them to do. I think with the push in the data disclosure, that will actually afford us to be able to go back to some of those companies and actually see where they are in terms of race, gender, ethnicity, and other forms of diversity, so that we can engage or at least hold them accountable for the whole spectrum of diversity. For example, I think there's a report that just came out yesterday, which said that 60% of the Russell 3000 boards don't have Black directors. So unfortunately, right now, some of those reports you get them as a one-off, and also just looking either at the S&P 500 or Fortune 1000, or so it's not a broad-based where you can actually hold companies accountable. That's why we're excited when it comes to some of the legislature that is out there in terms of having those disclosures, so that we can be able to look at a company holistically and be able to see through. And one of the things we've been advocating for, at least trying to encourage companies to do, is to report their EEO1 data, right, which also goes into the employee base, as opposed just to focusing on the board and the executives. So we will be going back in terms of engaging some of the companies, and our view really is that, as Marlene said, diversity is not a one and done. You could, have someone come in, whether it's a board level, a C-suite level, or, at any level in the organization, but if they don't stay because they don't feel the inclusion part of it, then, those issues still persist.
Thank you. And I know it seems like we have some exciting opportunities ahead of us. So hopefully that does come together. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Rufino.
Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you to the entire team, Mr. Pacheco, Ms. D'Amato, Ms. Tucker, Mr. Fox, Samiso, for the excellent and very informative presentation. We just wanted to add the congratulatory message to the Calpers Disability Advisory Committee on receiving their 2020 DAC of the Year Award. Big accomplishment. And as importantly, the treasurer wishes to particularly give a congratulation to the investment office for their achievement of a key performance indicator for adding, or at least to making sure that all SP 500 companies have at least one female director on their boards. And that accomplishment, it's huge, and it's very dear to the treasurer and Miss Mom. As you all are aware, she created a women's registry not too long ago, right after the passage of Senate Bill 826 and AB 979. And that registry has grown to over 400 women now that they are ready and willing to serve on any board where there is a need. So to the members of the public that are listening, if anybody's interested to get on the registry, please contact the treasurer's office and get on the registry so that you can get email notices on any private or public company board opportunities. So with that said, thank you again to the team for a very, very informative and with setting up some outstanding goals for the future. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Rufino. Ms. Middleton.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I don't want to prolong this, but two comments. One, I want to add my thanks and appreciation to every member of the team that was responsible for bringing this outstanding report and commitment to future work before us. It really makes one proud of being associated with Calpers. We have within Calpers perhaps some very unique opportunities to make a difference in the diversity and inclusion effort, not only in our own organization, but in organizations across the country, if not across the world. And that's just simply an opportunity that comes along so rarely. We do not want to miss it. And we really thank you for all of the work that you're doing. I note that depending on what the question was, that there were 21 to 27, 29% of CalPERS employees who did not feel comfortable for one reason or another in responding to the demographic information. That's certainly their right and their prerogative, and no one would want to take that away from them. At the same time, we want to do everything that we can to make sure every employee in our organization knows that they can and should be comfortable in providing that type of information, and that they will not only be stronger, but so will the rest of their friends and colleagues by participation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Middleton. Mr. Miller.
Yeah, I would also echo all the appreciation and the superlatives that you've already heard for the presenters and the team and all the fine work. One thing I would highlight in terms also of just, I'm so pleased to see CalPERS continuing to really lead by example. And in state government, having been here as long as I have, I started with the Duke-Majan administration. We had a real cultural change during the Wilson administration and Wilson era, and also changes in law that caused many of our departments and agencies to really step back from the whole subject of diversity and inclusion and actually dismantle and pull the rug out from under a lot of the efforts that were going on, both grassroots, rank and file efforts, and also organizational efforts. And CalPERS has always maintained, even in the face of some of the pressures in politics, a focus on diversity, inclusion, and to see this as kind of, the shining beacon of good government, I think it really is something that our examples down to actual activities, approaches, strategies, tactics are a great example. And I think it really can help the Newsom administration's efforts to kind of stamp out some of this Wilson era management culture that is still very ingrained in a lot of state agencies. And I'm seeing the administration is really making progress, even in some of the most entrenched kind of old school thinking in the agencies I deal with. And I think CalPERS example just demonstrates even more so that that focus is well put and is very much in line with what we're trying to do in the rest of the state. And so for me, it's not just our example to the world, but also for our other state agencies where these kind of examples are really helpful as we try to continue to improve and get more of a focus on improving our organizational and management cultures and opportunities for everyone. So big kudos. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Ms. Oliveris.
Thank you, President Jones. I'd like to thank Ms. Diadamo and Mr. Pacheco for presenting this. This is a really great report, and I look forward to working with you both on this going forward. I'd also like to see, as we move forward with this, current and projected demographics in California and how these statistics compare to those. I think that's a very important context, especially as we are a majority minority state. We have Latinas who are now the largest group of people entering college. And I want to make sure that we are tracking some of these things just to see where we stand. And then also, I'd like to look at, I'm always looking at data, correlations with performance, particularly with investment performance, and how the diversity in our investment office corresponds with our investment performance, if at all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, that's why I waited to last, and most of the questions I had have been asked, so I don't have to repeat them. But anyway, we do have a request from the public to speak on this. I've been advised, Mr. Fox, is someone still there?
Yes, Mr. President, stand by just a moment. Yes, Mr. President, we have Mr. Andrew Sanborn with the Center for Cultural Leadership.
Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Am I on?
Yes, you are, and you have 3 minutes, so identify yourself.
Yeah, I probably won't take that. I'm founder and president of the Center for Cultural Leadership in Coulterville, and hope you'll listen to a brief contrarian viewpoint. I hold degrees in English and history and political science and systematic and historical theology, written about 25 books, and specialized in an investigation of both classical and cultural Marxism and critical theory, critical race theory, systemic racism. In my view, DEI and the diversity and inclusion framework incorporate widely attested critical race theory, whose root is cultural or Western Marxism. All of us, of course, deplore racism, for example, but critical race theory instigates hostility between races at a time when we should be working toward racial harmony and understanding. And the same is true, I believe, of sexual preferentialism and a form of affirmative action. Moreover, this program will, in my view, alienate many of our hardworking Americans among your constituents and Christians, for example, others who believe in equality under the law, fair play, free speech, equal rights. The attempt to create special preferences for special groups is a revitalization of actually the old, classically Marxist idea of class consciousness, today known as identity politics. Calpers, in my view, should recognize the equality of all members and not attempt to privilege some and unintentionally deprivilege others. I think DEI will undermine the ideals of fairness, objectivity, and fair play, and could alienate a sizable portion of your constituency if consistently implemented. We live in a time when new and dangerous ideologies are overtaking the elite reaches of our society, and as they filter down, they're bringing great harm to our common hardworking citizens and their families. DEI is a prime example of this ideological poison. Bias is always a danger, but coercive preferentialism is perhaps the worst bias of all. Therefore, in conclusion, I urge you to bypass this proposal and instead work toward a truly fair approach toward all. We do need fresh, new, innovative thinking and not a rehash of old, discredited Marxism. Thank you very much for your time, my friends.
Okay, any other speaker, Mr. Fox?
Mr. President, that was the only caller we had on this subject.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so board members, I'm going to ask that we got maybe 2 short more presentations, then we'll break for lunch before, because we have to go into, a closed session. But we'll go ahead and try to take these last 2 items. Self-assessment, Ms. Simpson, are you there? C, Calpers 2021 Board Self-Assessment. There she is.
Thank you very much, board members and Chair Jones. If we could see the slides, that would be helpful. Thank you. So this board item, I'll keep it brief as we're heading to lunch, as you rightly said. This board item sets out the board's policy with respect to self-assessment. It gives a little background on the most recent evaluation that the board undertook and recaps the outcomes from that work. And then it provides the timeline for the forthcoming self-assessment. So could we go to the next slide? Thank you. The next few slides reset out the board's policy on self-assessment. This has been in place for quite a while, and I think is a good example of Calpers eating its own cooking. We've argued, and rightly so, that governance has an impact on performance. We see good evidence in research on that. So this part of the board's governance policy sets out how the Calpers board will ensure that its own governance is reviewed regularly and improvements can be made by the board in order to enhance the performance of the organization. So the next slide, please. So the board governance policy sets out a number of ways in which the self-assessment can take place, and they're set out on this slide. The item 3, the third-party evaluation of the board's performance, is something which is required every 2 years. Because the implementation was quite substantial from the last evaluation, the board president decided to postpone the rerun of the third-party evaluation to the coming year. We'll have the next slide. Thank you. So here we are, item D. An independent third party will assess board performance every 2 years. Thank you. The next slide. So in 2018, Calpers board partnered with the National Association of Corporate Directors. This is a leading group in the United States with thousands of members across the country. And Calpers has very long been a member of this group to help us both on Calpers' own governance, but also our governance program in relation to companies in our portfolio. Thank you. Next slide. So the elements of the 2018 board self-assessment are set out on this slide. The format was for NACD to develop a set of questions which looked at the different components in the board's governance arrangements. So one survey that was provided to board members for which they had confidential access was to look at the functioning of the board overall. The next element was to consider the committees and their performance and workings. And then the third survey was to look at what are called board attributes. In other words, the individual board member performance, and give an opportunity for board members to reflect on that and to share their observations on where Calpers can improve. Next slide, please. As some of you will be aware, what happened after the 2018 survey, where there were many areas that were highlighted for review and improvement, which was extremely productive. And the board president established a number of working groups on the board to pick up the main areas that had been identified. And this just really sums up those areas of work. So the first was looking at how to improve board education and orientation. The second was to consider roles and responsibilities, to look at the committee structures afresh and composition, and also to consider the role of the board's consultants. Next slide, please. The third area of work that was undertaken, led by the board groups, was to review the calendar and also the format for board meetings, and also to look at how the content, both the quantity of agenda item materials could be improved. The fourth area of work was to create a code of conduct, which clarified some elements that were already well embedded in the board's governance policy, but to set this out with annual attestation by board members. And finally, the Insight platform, which board members are now using, was under development at the time of the evaluation. And there was an opportunity to do some beta testing in the early stages of that new platform. And the purpose was really to move away from the hundreds of pages of paper and see whether the organization of data and analysis could be made more timely and accessible for board members. And the purpose there is clear. It's in order to help the board get access to the information needed to prepare for policy decisions, but also to support the board's oversight role, which is so important. And next slide, please. And again, the next slide. So what happened after the work quite a lot. As those of you will remember, the committee delegations have been revised. And I don't know if translation is the right word, but certainly put into plain English for ease of understanding and ready reference. Secondly, the board adopted Rosenberg's Rules of Order as a specially tailored option for rules of order for public bodies in California to update from the very lengthy and ancient Robert's Rules of Order. The committee structures were reviewed and a revised meeting calendar was adopted. And also we began a series of board education, which was carried out both with internal and external subject matter experts. And that work will continue. Next slide, please. Furthermore, the board developed and adopted a code of conduct, as mentioned, and also established an annual stakeholder engagement forum. And we've now had 2 of those. And the Insight platform for online receipt of information and monitoring has been further developed. Next slide. So now I can set out the process for the next board self-assessment. As before, in order to give the board an opportunity to look at trends over time, there'll be a survey which is provided to each one of you with the 3 component pieces: the board as a whole, each committee, and then individual board member attributes. Next slide. So this is our timeline. We are in the process of the planning and development this month in March. And the plan is to have these surveys uploaded in a secure form so that board members will each receive a password which enables them to access that information confidentially. It will be specific to the individual, and it will ensure that there can be complete confidentiality in the returns that are given. What will then follow is NACD. Excuse me, could you go to the next slide? Thank you. Following the completion of the surveys by each board member and also their, I should say, and also their delegates. All board members and delegates will receive this opportunity to contribute to the assessment. The period of April will be used by NACD to analyze the results. And then what we're hoping for is for NACD to be able to come to the July board meeting in order to present the findings and have a discussion with the board on any next steps which board members are recommending. I have the next slide. So I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have and looking forward very much to this next round of work, because it no doubt is going to be extremely valuable.
Yeah, I think it's very clear, Ms. Simpson, very well laid out as usual and easy to follow. So we appreciate that. So given that, we have one question. Ms. Brown.
Thank you. I don't mean to delay our lunch break. I was just curious and to see if the rest of the board members felt this way, is that, we're going to start meeting in person again, beginning soon, right? Maybe June, July? If we all get our vaccines, it could be June or July. But I was wondering if we might hold off on this until we could, the board could really be more collaborative in person and then take a look at this maybe later in the fall, start this process in the fall. We really have been apart since March, and I don't feel the same collaboration that we had when we were all together as a group. And so I'm wondering if it might make more sense until we have some more, together time. It's good time, good description of it before we undertake this again. That's just my suggestion and my feeling. Thank you.
Well, the risk, Ms. Brown, is that we don't know when we may be able to come back together.
Are you saying you don't believe the Biden administration and we're not all going to be vaccinated? Come on.
Come on, it's not Biden. I think that, unless I hear otherwise, we can go ahead with the collection of data, and then if there's some opportunities that appear that we'll be able to rejoin, we may wait beyond July, so we'll get together to deal with the results of the findings. That may be an option, but we just have no clue about, when we'll be able to reconvene as.
My hope is that we'll be able to meet in person at the July offsite. That's my personal goal. I don't know about the rest of you.
And that's my goal too, Ms. Brown.
Okay, all right. So, all right. I was just thinking it might be helpful to hold off, but if everybody wants to go, we can go now.
Okay. And we're, based on what the majority of the board feels, Ms. Ortega.
I just wanted to make a comment about the gathering because it's come up a couple times and sort of speculation, and I feel like kind of implying that the board or the CEO have the authority to determine when we can get back together, and that is not the case right now. There are public health orders in place that prohibit gatherings of a certain size, and so there would need to be updates on all those public health directives, and certainly the state employee impact is that same under that same regulation. So I think we can speculate about when, but I want to make clear that we don't have the authority entirely within our own decision making. We need to wait for those public health orders.
Great, thank you, Ms. Ortega, for that.
Yeah, Mr. President, that is why I mentioned in my CEO report that we're following the guidance from public health officials, because that's not a decision we can independently make. And we are not currently planning to have the July offsite in person.
Right. Okay, Mr. Fechner.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I was just going to allude back to Ms. Frost's comments earlier when she said they were looking at a possibility of some staff returning in September. Well, if staff's not going to be there, we're certainly not. So I just want to say, let's not get ahead of the program here and start thinking about July.
Right, yeah. All pertinent comments. Okay, so that's the only comments I have on that one. And thank you, Ms. Simpson, for the report. We will now go to Ms. Frost for your directions, summary of board directions.
Okay, I took two. One is an education session for the board related to all of our employer resource groups, also information and data that we collect on benefit accuracy, which I think will give you a little reassurance that the majority of the calculations are in fact accurate as we compare estimates to actual benefits paid. And then the second one is related to Assembly Bill 845, and I just would like to check with Mr. Rubalcaba after Mr. Brown answered your question about whether this bill would apply to Calpers, and it appears as it's currently written that Calpers already offers these benefits. So we could bring it back as an information item or an education item for a briefing, but would really leave it up to the board whether you want to have that continue to be committee direction.
Okay, that's fine.
I would, if I could speak, Mr. President?
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Rubalcaba.
Yeah, I would like the full board to have a briefing.
Okay.
And perhaps take a vote on endorsement, even it just to understand how it does or does not impact Calpers, but definitely is being sponsored, so it must impact other retirement agencies. And it's part of my earlier statement, how we're taking the lead on the health equity. We should continue to be seen as a leader in other legislation areas. Thank you.
Okay, so that's the direction, Ms. Frost. Okay. Okay, seeing no other requests to speak. Mr. Fox, do we have anyone for public comment?
Mr. President, no, there are no callers for public comment.
Okay, well then I think we are going to adjourn now into closed session for items 1 through 3 from the closed session agenda, and we will start that meeting at 1 o'clock. This will include the following litigation matters: Wedding et al. v. Calpers. We also will receive the General Counsel's update on pending litigation. So at this time, the board members will exit this open session meeting, and we will connect at 1 o'clock to the closed session meeting. Thank you all.
Mr. Jones, sorry to interrupt, but before you adjourn the meeting, I wanted to let you know that I do not have an update for closed session. I had texted you earlier, but I guess you didn't get that text. But in any event, we can dispense with the closed session if.
Okay. Well, hey, so it's just lunch and whatever you want to do now. Okay. And yeah, I got that text, but I thought that was for the AM closed session meeting.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay, but anyway, so there's no need for a closed session. So retract what I said just now and have a good weekend, everyone, and stay safe. And so this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.